In the northeastern corner of Africa, a river flows backward. Not backward in time, but backward from what you might expect. While other rivers flow south, the Nile flows north. It flows through the largest desert on Earth. Close your eyes and imagine it. The burning sand stretches forever. The air shimmers with heat. Your throat feels dry just thinking about it. But there, cutting through all that sand runs a ribbon of cool green life. The river. Every summer the same miracle happened. The river would rise, slowly at first, then faster. Dark water would spill over the banks. It would spread across the valley like a gentle blanket. The water carried something special. Dark, rich mud from faraway mountains. When the flood waters pulled back, they left this mud behind. Black soil, perfect soil, the best soil in the ancient world. The people who lived beside this river noticed something. The flood came at the same time every year. They could count on it. They could plan for it. They began to call their home Kemet, the Black Land. Because of that rich, dark soil. Beyond where the flood waters reached, everything was different. Red sand, burning rock, empty desert. They called that Deshret, the Red Land. Picture yourself standing at the edge of the Black Land. Behind you, farmers work in green fields. You can hear water bubbling through irrigation channels. You smell wet earth and growing things. But take one step forward and you're in the Red Land, the desert, where nothing grows, where the sand burns your feet, where the sun has no mercy. This narrow strip of life was protected. Desert to the east, desert to the west, rapids to the south, sea to the north. It was like nature built walls around this place. Inside those walls, something special would grow. Not just crops, but the longest-lasting kingdom in human history. 3,000 years, that's how long ancient Egypt lasted. Think about that. 3,000 years of kings, of gold, of gods. The same prayers spoken in the same temples for thousands of years. Grandfather teaching grandson the same stories his grandfather taught him. And his grandfather before that. And before that, an unbroken chain stretching back into the mist of time. This story, this 3,000-year story, it all begins with the river's strange behavior. The Nile flows north, always north, from the mountains of Ethiopia to the Mediterranean Sea. 4,000 miles of water moving against what seems natural. The ancient Egyptians noticed this. They noticed everything about their river. They had to. Their lives depended on it. Every year in the middle of summer, when the land was driest, when the crops were harvested, when the ground cracked under the sun, the river would begin to rise. First, the water would turn green, filled with plant life from the far south. Then it would turn red, red with iron-rich soil from the Ethiopian highlands. Finally it would overflow. The entire valley would disappear under dark water. Villages became islands. People travelled by boat where they usually walked. This wasn't disaster. This was life. The flood brought new soil. It washed away the salt that built up from irrigation. It refilled the channels and wells. It brought fish and waterfowl. When the waters pulled back after 4 months, they left behind a fresh, clean slate, ready for planting. The Egyptians divided their year around this rhythm. Akhet, the flood season. Pare, the growing season. Shemu, the harvest season. 4 months each, like clockwork. So reliable you could set your calendar by it, and they did. This predictability shaped how Egyptians saw the world. In Mesopotamia, between the Tigris and Euphrates, floods came randomly, destroying cities, killing thousands. No wonder their stories were full of angry gods and world-ending floods. But in Egypt, the flood was gentle, predictable, life-giving. Their gods were stable. Their world made sense. Nature built walls around Egypt. To the east and west, deserts stretched forever. To the north, the Mediterranean Sea. To the south, 6 cataracts. Violent rapids where granite rocks turned the river into churning foam. No ancient army could navigate those waters. Egypt was protected, isolated, special. The Black Land itself was thin, in most places just a few miles wide. You could walk from green fields to red desert in minutes, stand in the middle of a farm and see desert cliffs on both sides. This wasn't a vast empire. It was a ribbon of life, a garden between walls of sand. But the river wasn't always kind. Go back far enough, and the Nile Valley looked very different. 12,000 years ago, the Sahara was green. Hard to imagine, isn't it? Where sand dunes tower today, Grasslands stretched, lakes dotted the landscape. Giraffes and elephants wandered where now only scorpions survive. Small groups of hunters followed the animals. They carried stone spears and arrows. They painted pictures on rock walls, pictures that still exist today. Hunters surrounding a giraffe, women dancing, children playing, regular people living regular lives. Then the rains began to fail, slowly at first, a dry year here, a shorter rainy season there. But it kept getting worse. The grass died, the lakes dried up, the animals left or died. The Sahara was turning into the desert we know today. The hunters had a choice: die with the desert or find water. They found the Nile. From east and west, small groups straggled into the valley. They came with nothing but their tools and their hunger. They found a river that never ran dry, animals that came to drink, fish in the water, birds in the reeds. At first they kept hunting, but something changed around 8,000 years ago. Maybe someone noticed that seeds dropped near the water grew into plants. Maybe they saw wild wheat growing after the flood. However it happened, they began to farm. Early farming was simple. Wait for the flood. Scatter seeds in the wet mud. Hope for the best. But it worked. One field could feed more people than 100 hunters could catch. Villages grew. 50 people, 100, 200. These early farmers learned to work together. One person couldn't dig an irrigation channel, but 20 could. One family couldn't build a proper house, but a village could help. Cooperation meant survival. The seeds of civilization were planted in that dark mud. They buried their dead facing west toward the setting sun. They put pots and tools in the graves. Already they believed in an afterlife. Already they cared for their dead. In one grave from this time, archaeologists found a woman buried with her pet gazelle, both arranged carefully, both treated with respect. These weren't savages. These were people like us, people who loved, who hoped, who feared death but faced it with dignity. As centuries passed, differences emerged. The river valley wasn't all the same. In the south, the valley was narrow, sometimes just a mile wide. Cliffs rose on both sides like walls. Each floodplain was cut off from the next. Each village was its own little world. This southern land would be called Upper Egypt. Upper because it was upstream. The river flowed down from here to the sea. Life in Upper Egypt was hard but simple. One town, one chief, one local god. Everyone knew everyone. The desert was always close. You could see it from your doorstep. But follow the river north and everything changes. Near modern Cairo, the valley spreads out. The river splits into dozens of channels. The land becomes a vast triangle of waterways and marshes. The Greeks would later call it the delta because it looked like their letter, delta, a triangle. This was Lower Egypt, lower because it was downstream. Life here was different. Instead of narrow valleys, vast plains. Instead of one river, many channels. Instead of isolation, connection. Boats could travel easily between towns. Trade was simple, ideas spread fast. The two regions developed different cultures, different crowns. The white crown of Upper Egypt was tall and bowling pin-shaped. The red crown of Lower Egypt was flat with a spiral in front. Different gods, too. Upper Egypt worshipped Seth, god of chaos and the desert. Lower Egypt preferred Horus, the falcon god of order. By 4000 BCE, real cities were growing. In Upper Egypt, Hierakonpolis, city of the hawk, houses packed together, workshops for pottery and beer brewing, a temple made of wood and reeds. In Lower Egypt, Buto emerged in the marshes, a city of fishermen and traders. Trade routes developed. Boats carried gold from Nubia in the far south, cedar wood from Lebanon, copper from Sinai, obsidian from Ethiopia. Even in these early days, Egypt was connected. The river was a highway. Goods and ideas flowed as freely as the water. People were organizing, not just villages now, but regions. Chiefs became kings of small territories. They fought. They made alliances. They married each other's daughters. Slowly, two kingdoms emerged from many. Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. The stage was set. The two lands waited for someone strong enough to unite them. The two lands waited. Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. But change was coming. It started in a place called Nagada, a town in Upper Egypt. Here, around 4000 BCE, something new began to grow. Not just another farming village, something bigger. Walk through a Nagada cemetery from this time. The differences jump out at you. Most graves are simple, a body curled on its side, a few pots, maybe a flint knife, but some graves are different. Bigger, deeper, filled with treasures. Beautiful pottery painted with boats and dancers, ivory combs, stone vases that took months to carve. Someone was richer than everyone else. Someone had power. The simple equality of early villages was breaking down. Chiefs were becoming kings. Followers were becoming subjects. The pottery tells the story. In Nagada times, the pots were beautiful but simple. Red clay with white paintings, pictures of the hunt, hippos, crocodiles, the animals of the river. But in Nagada too, everything changed. The pottery became mass-produced. Less beautiful, more practical, made in workshops by full-time potters, traded up and down the river. This is how civilizations grow. When a farmer can trade grain for pots, he doesn't need to make his own. The potter doesn't need to farm. Each person does what they do best. Society gets more complex, more specialized, more unequal. Nagada II culture spread like floodwater. North along the river, south into Nubia. The same pottery styles, the same burial customs, the same gods. By 3500 BCE, most of Egypt looked to Nagada, not conquered by armies, just absorbed, like a sponge soaking up water. Power was concentrating. You can see it in the town layouts. Regular houses clustered together. Then set apart bigger buildings. Thicker walls. Guards at the door. The chief's compound. Or should we say the king's palace? The line between chief and king is thin. When does a powerful chief become a petty king? When people bow, when he claims the gods speak through him, when he controls life and death. The symbols of kingship appeared. There was scepter shaped like a strange animal head. The flail for threshing grain, showing control over harvests. The mace, a weapon that became ceremonial. These weren't just tools anymore. They were symbols. Hold them, and you held power. By Nagada III, around 3200 BCE, the transformation was complete. Kings ruled territories spanning hundreds of miles. They commanded armies. They controlled trade. They built temples where they stood between people and gods. Most importantly, they had a new idea. They weren't just powerful humans. They were something more. The gods had chosen them. The gods spoke through them. Maybe, just maybe, they were gods themselves. The ancient equality was dead. In its place, hierarchy. Pyramid-shaped, with the king at the top. Below him, nobles and priests. Below them, craftsmen and scribes. At the bottom, farmers, the many supporting the few. The pattern was set. It would last 3,000 years. Cemetery U at Abydos shows this new world. Royal tombs bigger than houses, filled with hundreds of pots, ivory labels with the earliest writing, and something chilling. Subsidiary graves, servants buried with their king, young men and women killed to serve in the afterlife. The king's power reached beyond death. Who united Egypt? The honest answer is we don't know, but we have clues, fragments, pieces of a puzzle with most parts missing. There was a king later called Scorpion. We know him from a ceremonial mace head found at Hierakonpolis. The carving shows a tall figure wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt. He holds a hoe, breaking ground for a canal. The scorpion symbol floats by his head. His name, perhaps, or his totem. Around him, smaller figures carry standards. Dead enemies hang from the standards. Birds perch on the bodies, pecking at them. The message is clear. The Scorpion King brings water to his people and death to his enemies. He controls life and death. He is powerful, but is he the uniter the macehead doesn't say? Then there's Nama. We know him from a piece of carved stone about 2 feet tall. The Nama palette, they call it. It's our first historical document, our first piece of political propaganda, and what a piece it is. On one side, Nama wears the white crown of Upper Egypt. He raises a mace to smash an enemy's skull. The enemy kneels, helpless. Above them, Horus the Falcon holds another enemy by the nose. The enemy's body is the marshland of Lower Egypt. The message couldn't be clearer. The king of Upper Egypt conquers Lower Egypt with the god's blessing. Flip the palette over. Now Nama wears the red crown of Lower Egypt. He marches with standard bearers. Before him lie rows of headless enemies, their heads placed neatly between their legs. Above, 2 fantastic beasts twist their necks together. Their necks form a circle where cosmetics would be ground. Order from chaos, unity from division. Was Nama the first true king of all Egypt? Or was there another, earlier uniter? The Egyptians themselves were confused. Later King Lis mentioned Menes as the first king. But was Menes another name for Narmer? Or someone else? A predecessor? A successor? We don't know. The mists of time hide the truth. What we do know is that by 3100 BCE, Egypt was one. One king wore both crowns, the double crown they called it, the white crown inside the red, south and north, upper and lower. Two lands became one land, the greatest political achievement of the ancient world. The new king needed a new capital, not in the south, which would anger the north, not in the north, which would anger the south, but right at the junction, where the valley met the delta. He founded Memphis, the balance of the two lands they called it. Perfect name, perfect location. Memphis grew fast. Within generations it was Egypt's largest city. White walls gleaming in the sun, harbours full of boats, markets loud with trade, temples where gods dwelt, palaces where kings ruled, the heart of the new nation. But uniting Egypt wasn't just about conquest. It was about creating an idea. The idea that Egypt should be one, that the gods wanted it that way, that it had always been meant to be. The king spread this idea through art, through ritual, through force when necessary. He created ceremonies where he wore both crowns, where he honoured both sets of gods, where he literally tied together symbols of north and south. It worked. Within a few generations, Egyptians couldn't imagine their country divided. Unity became natural, division became chaos, something to be feared, something the king prevented by his very existence. The pattern would hold for 3,000 years. Even when Egypt split as it sometimes did, everyone knew it was wrong, unnatural, temporary. The two lands belonged together. The early kings faced a problem. How do you control a country stretching 1,000 miles along a river? How do you make farmers in the delta obey when you live weeks away by boat? How do you keep local chiefs from declaring independence? The answer was brilliant. You become a god. Not claiming to speak for the gods, not chosen by the gods, but actually divine, the living embodiment of Horus, the falcon god. When the king sat on his throne, Horus sat on his throne. When the king spoke, Horus spoke. When the king died, he became Osiris, ruler of the dead. His son became the new Horus. The cycle continued forever. This wasn't just propaganda. The Egyptians believed it. Deeply. Completely. The king was different from other humans. He had multiple souls. His Ka, his life force, was stronger. His Ak, his spiritual power, could bless or curse. When he performed rituals, they worked because he was divine. The floods came because he commanded them. The crops grew because he ensured it. Egypt prospered because a god ruled it. The kings built tombs to match their status. At Abydos, in the ancestral cemetery of the first kings, massive mud brick structures rose. Not pyramids yet, but impressive. Multi-room complexes sunk into the desert. Storerooms filled with everything a god-king might need: food, drink, furniture, weapons, servants. At Saqqara, near Memphis, even grander tombs appeared. Mastabas, we call them. Arabic for bench, because they look like giant benches. Rectangular, flat-topped, filled with chambers and passages. Outside, palace facade decoration, intricate patterns of recessed and projecting bricks, making mud brick look magnificent. The tombs tell us about more than death. They show us administration being born. Little ivory and bone labels found in the tombs bear the earliest Egyptian writing. Not stories yet, just names, titles, years. Year of smiting the northerners. Year of the first festival of Sed. History beginning to be recorded. Writing meant control. A king's command could travel the length of Egypt unchanged. Taxes could be recorded. Laws could be permanent. The spoken word flies away. The written word remains. Power carved in stone. Officials multiplied. The Jati, we translate as vizier, the king's right hand, the overseer of all overseers, then treasurers, military commanders, overseers of works, scribes, always scribes, writing everything down, making the kingdom real through records. One remarkable survival shows this new world. The Palermo stone, a black basalt slab covered in tiny hieroglyphs. Year by year it records the early king's reigns, the height of each flood, festivals celebrated, temples founded, wars fought, buildings constructed. History is a list. But what a list. The birth certificate of a civilization. The ideology was complete. The king was a god. The government was his household, officials were his servants, the country was his estate, everything flowed from him and returned to him. Like the Nile itself, the king was the source of life. Remove him, and chaos returned. Keep him strong, and Egypt prospered. This idea seems strange to us. We elect leaders, we limit terms, we separate church and state. But the Egyptians found their system worked. It gave stability, purpose, order. For 3,000 years, through good kings and bad, through prosperity and disaster, the idea endured. Egypt needed a divine king. Without one, it wasn't truly Egypt. The foundation was set. The stage prepared. Now the greatest building project in human history could begin. The age of pyramids was about to dawn. But first, someone had to imagine the impossible. His name was Imhotep. Not a king, not a prince. Just a man with an idea that would change the world. He served King Djoser, third king of the third dynasty. The year was around 2680 BCE. Egypt was unified, prosperous, ready for something new. Until now, kings built their tombs of mud brick. Large tombs, yes, impressive tombs, but mud brick crumbles. Rain dissolves it. Time destroys it. Even the mightiest mastaba would one day return to dust. Imhotep looked at these crumbling tombs and thought, what if we built in stone? Not just any stone construction. Egyptians had used stone before, a doorway here, a lined chamber there. But Imhotep imagined something different. An entire building of cut stone. Blocks fitted so perfectly that a knife blade couldn't slip between them. Stone upon stone, rising to the sky. The place was Saqqara, the city of the dead for Memphis. Here, on the desert plateau overlooking the capital, Djoser would build his eternal home. Imhotep started with the traditional mastaba. Square, solid, about 20 feet high, but then he did something unprecedented. He built another smaller mastaba on top, then another and another. Stand back and watch it grow. First one level, then 2, then 4, finally 6, each level smaller than the one below. A staircase of stone rising 200 feet into the desert sky. The Step Pyramid, the first large stone building in human history. But Imhotep didn't stop there. Around the pyramid he created a vast complex. Courtyards, chapels, storerooms, all in stone. All revolutionary. He invented new ways to make stone imitate older materials. Columns that looked like bundles of reeds, but carved from limestone. Ceilings that resembled palm logs, but cut from solid rock. Doors that seemed wooden, but were stone. Carved to show wood grain, and fixed permanently open. Why these imitations? Because this wasn't just a tomb. It was an eternal palace. A place where Djoser's spirit would live forever. Everything the king knew in life recreated in stone for eternity. The familiar made permanent. Walk through this complex even today in its ruined state and feel the revolution. Before Djoser, death was an ending. After him, it was a transformation. The tomb wasn't a grave. It was a machine for eternal life. Each element had purpose. Each corridor led somewhere meaningful. The pyramid itself was the staircase to heaven. The king would climb it to join Ra, the sun god, in his daily journey across the sky. The underground chambers carved from living rock held the king's body. But his spirit was free to move, up the stairs, through the chambers, into the courtyard where eternal ceremonies played out. The complex faced north, toward the circumpolar stars, the stars that never set. The Egyptians called them the imperishable ones. By aligning his pyramid with them, Djoser joined their eternal dance. Death defeated by architecture, mortality overcome by geometry. But the real revolution was stone itself. Stone meant forever. A mud brick palace crumbles. A stone palace endures. A wooden shrine rots. A stone shrine stands eternal. Imhotep hadn't just built a tomb. He'd discovered how to build eternity. The technical challenges were staggering. How do you move blocks weighing tons? How do you lift them high into the air? How do you fit them perfectly? Imhotep solved each problem. Ramps of mud, brick and sand. Sledges pulled by teams of men. Copper tools and patient craftsmanship. One block at a time, one level at a time. 6 years of continuous work. When it was finished, Egypt had its first pyramid. Gleaming white in the desert sun. Visible for miles. A mountain built by men. A ladder to heaven. a statement of power that spoke without words. The king who could build this could do anything, command anyone. The pyramid was propaganda in stone. Imhotep became a legend. Later generations worshipped him as a god, the god of wisdom and medicine, the first architect whose name we know, the man who taught Egypt to build forever. His revolution would inspire every pyramid to come, every temple, every monument. He showed that humans could build on the scale of gods. The step pyramid still stands, 47 centuries later. Empires have risen and fallen, languages have died, entire civilizations have vanished. But Djoser's pyramid endures. Imhotep was right. Stone is eternal, at least as close to eternal as humans can achieve. After Djoser, every king wanted a pyramid. But the next great leap came with King Sneferu, first king of the 4th dynasty. Around 2600 BCE, he began the golden age of pyramid building, and he began with a disaster. At Medum, about 50 miles south of Memphis, Sneferu started building a step pyramid like Djoser's, 7 steps originally, then 8. But somewhere along the way, the plan changed. Fill in the steps, create smooth sides, make a true pyramid, a perfect triangle pointing to heaven. The ancient builders filled the steps with carefully cut packing blocks. They covered everything with smooth white limestone. From a distance, it must have been magnificent. A perfect white triangle against blue sky. But something went wrong. Maybe the angle was too steep. Maybe the foundation wasn't strong enough. The outer layers collapsed. Thousands of tons of stone crashed down in avalanche. Today at Medum, you can see the disaster frozen in time. The core still stands, looking like a tower surrounded by hills of rubble. The hills are the collapsed outer layers, a pyramid that failed. But Sneferu learned from failure. At Dashur, north of Medum, he tried again. This time he started with a better foundation. Better planning. The pyramid rose smoothly, but halfway up the builders realized the angle was still too steep. The weight was enormous. Cracks appeared. Disaster loomed again. So they changed the angle, from 54 degrees to 43 degrees. The pyramid continued up, but at a gentler slope. The result looks strange. The bent pyramid, we call it. A pyramid that changes its mind halfway up. But it stands. 46 centuries later, it still stands. The outer casing mostly intact. Still smooth. Still impressive. Sneferu wasn't satisfied. A bent pyramid wasn't perfect. So he built a third pyramid. Same site. Gentler angle from the start. 43 degrees all the way. The Red Pyramid, named for its reddish limestone core. The first successful true pyramid. Smooth sides, perfect geometry, the template for all pyramids to come. Think about this. 1 king, 3 massive pyramids. More stone moved than any king before or after. Sneferu built more than his famous son would build. He experimented, failed, learned, succeeded. The perfect example of human determination. But his son would build the most famous pyramid of all, Khufu. Greeks called him Cheops. He ruled around 2540 BCE, and he decided to build the ultimate pyramid, not the largest in footprint. His fathers were wider, but the tallest, the most perfect, the Great Pyramid. The numbers still stagger. Original height, 481 feet. Base, 755 feet on each side. Volume, 2.5 million cubic meters. Weight, 6 million tons. Made of 2.3 million stone blocks. Average weight per block, 2.5 tons. Some blocks weigh 15 tons. The granite beams over the king's chamber weigh 50 tons each. How? That's the question everyone asks. How did they build it? The answer is simpler than you might think. They used what they had. Unlimited manpower during flood season. Simple tools, brilliant organization, and time. 20 years of continuous work. The workers weren't slaves. We know this now. They were Egyptians. Farmers with nothing to do during the flood months. They came to work for the God King. They were fed, housed, organized into teams with names like the King's Favourites and the Perfectioners. We found their village, their bakeries, their breweries, their cemeteries. They ate meat, drank beer, were buried with honour when they died. The work was hard but not cruel. Copper chisels to cut soft limestone, harder stones to shape granite, wooden sledges to move blocks, water to lubricate the sand, ramps to raise blocks. We argue about the ramps. Straight, zigzag, spiral. But ramps of some kind. No other way to lift stones that high. Inside, the pyramid is a maze. Passages leading up and down, the grand gallery, a magnificent corridor sloping upward. The king's chamber, where Khufu's mummy once lay in a granite sarcophagus. The queen's chamber, misnamed by Arabs. No queen was buried there. Air shafts pointing to specific stars, every element planned, every angle calculated. The precision astounds. The base is level within 2.1 centimetres. The sides face true north within 3 minutes of arc. The corners are almost perfect right angles. This wasn't rough construction. This was engineering approaching perfection. Outside, the pyramid was covered in smooth white limestone, polished until it shone like a mirror, topped with a golden capstone. Imagine it new. A perfect white triangle reflecting the sun, visible for dozens of miles. A man-made mountain marking the centre of the universe. Khufu's son Khafra built next. His pyramid looks taller, but isn't. He built on higher ground. Clever positioning. At the top, some original casing stones survive. Smooth, tight-fitted, showing how all pyramids once looked. But Khafra added something new. Down the causeway from his pyramid he carved a guardian from living rock. A lion's body, a king's head, the great Sphinx, largest statue in the ancient world. Mystery incarnate. The Sphinx faces east, toward the rising sun. Every dawn the first rays hit its face. The face is probably Khafra's, but wind and sand have worn features smooth. The nose is gone, shot off by Mamluk soldiers using it for target practice. But the power remains. Something about that face, that gaze, looking past you, past everything, toward eternity. Khafra's son Menkaura built the third Giza pyramid. Much smaller, only 215 feet high, but exquisite. The lower course is cased in red granite from Aswan. Incredibly hard stone, incredibly hard to work, but polished to perfection. Quality over quantity, the last great pyramid of the 4th dynasty. Stand at Giza. Look at these 3 mountains of stone, built by grandfather, father and son. 3 generations. 3 statements of power. The greatest building project in human history. Never equalled, never surpassed. 4,500 years old and still inspiring awe. After the 4th dynasty, something changed. The pyramids continued but smaller. The focus shifted. The 5th dynasty kings, beginning around 2500 BCE, called themselves sons of Ra. Not just protected by the sun god, actually descended from him. Their pyramids clustered at Abu Sir between Giza and Saqqara. Well built but modest. The real innovation lay elsewhere. Sun temples appeared. Open courtyards with massive obelisks, the Ben stone they called it. A pyramid shape on a tall pillar. First ray of sunlight at creation frozen in stone. These temples were for the living. Places where the king renewed his power, where he merged with Ra each day, where the sun's energy flowed into Egypt through the royal person. Inside the pyramids, something revolutionary appeared. Writing. Not just names and titles anymore. Religious texts, spells, prayers, instructions for the afterlife. We call them the pyramid texts. The oldest religious literature in the world, carved into pyramid walls starting with King Yunus, last ruler of the 5th dynasty. The sky's reed floats are launched for Unis, that he may cross on them to Lightland, to Ra. The texts speak of transformation. The dead king becomes a star. He sails with Ra. He judges the dead. He commands gods. Death is just a doorway. The texts are the key. These aren't coherent stories. They're fragments. Spells collected over centuries. Some so old the Egyptians themselves didn't understand them. But patterns emerge. The king rises. He overcomes obstacles. He claims his throne in heaven. He maintains order for eternity. The same job as on earth, but cosmic now. The texts tell us how Egyptians saw death. Not an ending, a journey. Dangerous, yes. The path had monsters, tests, gates that required passwords, but survivable, with the right knowledge, the right preparations, the right words. Magic made real through writing. Outside the pyramids, a new literature bloomed. Wisdom texts, instructions from father to son, how to live, how to succeed. Be skilled in speech that you may be strong. If you are a leader, listen calmly to the speech of a petitioner. Practical advice, but also moral guidance, truth, justice, proper behaviour, the concept of ma'at made personal. Biographies appeared in tombs, Not kings now, but nobles. They tell their stories, their accomplishments. I gave bread to the hungry, clothing to the naked. I never let anyone sleep angry. I spoke truly. I did ma'at. They want to be remembered. They want their names to live. The immortality of memory joining the immortality of the soul. But darkness was coming. The 6th dynasty started strong. Pepi Su may have ruled 94 years, the longest reign in history. But length doesn't mean strength. The kingdom was rotting from within. Provincial governors grew powerful. They built tombs rivaling royal ones. They passed their offices to their sons. Central control weakened. The climate was changing too. The floods became irregular. Some years too low, crops failed, famine struck. Other years too high, villages washed away. The predictable river became unpredictable. Mayat itself seemed broken. You can feel the change in the art. Old Kingdom art showed perfection. Ideal humans in an ideal world. Faces calm, bodies strong, everything in proportion. But late Old Kingdom art shows strain. Faces lined with worry, bodies thin, scenes of famine. The confidence was gone. The Pyramid of Pepi II tells the story. Started grand. Planned to rival the great 4th dynasty monuments. But resources ran out. Standards dropped. The fine limestone casing hides a core of rubble and mud. Shortcuts. Cost-cutting. A kingdom running on empty. Provincial leaders stopped sending taxes. Why support a distant king when local problems needed solving? They kept resources at home, built local armies, made local alliances. Egypt was fracturing. The two lands pulling apart. The last kings of the 6th dynasty are shadows. We know names, little else. They ruled maybe 2 years each, maybe less. The royal succession, stable for centuries, collapsed into chaos. Later tradition spoke of 70 kings in 70 days. Exaggeration, but it captures the speed of collapse. By 2181 BCE, the Old Kingdom was dead. The Pyramid Age over. The great monuments would stand forever, but the civilization that built them had crumbled. Egypt entered its first dark age. The center could not hold. Chaos returned. But Egypt would rise again. It always did. The two lands would reunite. New pyramids would rise. Not as grand as the old ones, but the idea endured. The king was divine. Order must triumph over chaos. Ma'at must be restored. The eternal cycle would continue. The pyramids still stood in the desert, silent reminders of what was possible, what had been achieved, what might be achieved again. Stone is patient. It can wait. And Egypt had learned to build in stone. Stone is patient. It can wait. But people cannot. When the Old Kingdom crumbled, the pyramids remained, but the system that built them vanished like morning mist. The collapse wasn't sudden, more like a slow crumbling, like watching mud brick dissolve in unexpected rain. First, the edges soften, then pieces fall away. Finally, the whole structure slumps into shapelessness. That's what happened to Egypt around 2181 BCE. In Memphis, the capital, kings still sat on thrones, but their names are confused, their reigns brief. The Turin Papyrus, written centuries later, lists them but admits uncertainty. 18 kings of Memphis, it says, but then adds that many records were lost. Royal authority had become a ghost, present but powerless. Real power lay in the provinces now. Local governors who once bowed to Memphis now ruled like kings. They passed their offices to their sons, built their own armies, collected their own taxes. Why send grain to a distant capital when your own people were starving? Because famine had come to Egypt. The floods failed, not once but repeatedly. Low floods meant less planting area. Less planting meant less food. Less food meant hungry people. Hungry people meant trouble. The predictable river had become unpredictable. The foundation of Egyptian life was shaking. Listen to the voices from this time. They speak from tomb walls and papyrus fragments. I gave bread to the hungry and clothing to the naked. Every noble's biography repeats this. Why? Because hunger was everywhere. Giving bread wasn't just kindness, it was survival. Feed your neighbours or face revolt. The whole country has become like a locust after a harvest. That's from the prophecy of Neferti, written later but remembering this time. Empty fields, empty stomachs, empty royal treasuries. The abundance of the Pyramid Age seemed like a dream. In this chaos, two centres of power emerged. In the north, Heracleopolis, a city in Middle Egypt that had grown strong. Its rulers claimed royal titles. They controlled the delta and the northern valleys. They had resources, allies, ambition. In the south, Thebes, a provincial town that would become a mighty city. But not yet. Now it was just another local power. Its rulers also claimed royal titles. They controlled the southern valleys, the ancient homeland of Egyptian unity. Between them lay contested ground, towns that switched sides with each battle, mayors who called themselves kings, warlords who ruled through fear. Egypt wasn't one country anymore. It was dozens of tiny kingdoms, each claiming legitimacy, each struggling to survive. But in this darkness, something strange happened. New voices emerged, not kings or nobles, common people. They spoke of justice, of fairness, of rights even peasants possessed. The old order was dead. Maybe a better order could be born. The most famous voice belongs to the eloquent peasant. His story survives complete. A peasant from the oasis, robbed by a noble servant. Instead of accepting his loss, he complains. He goes to the local governor. He speaks and speaks and speaks. 9 petitions in all, each more eloquent than the last. He compares justice to water in the desert, to breath for the drowning. He argues that officials exist to help the weak, that power brings responsibility, that even a peasant deserves fair treatment. The story has a happy ending. The peasant gets justice, his goods returned, the thief punished. But the real message is deeper. A peasant speaking to nobles as equals, demanding justice based on right, not rank. This was revolutionary. The old hierarchy was crumbling in minds as well as politics. Other texts echo this theme. Speak truth, do justice, for it is mighty, it is great, it endures. Not because the king commands it, but because it's right. Justice existed independent of royal decree, a dangerous idea, a necessary idea, an idea whose time had come. The chaos was creative. When the centre cannot hold, the edges must find their own solutions. Local leaders had to earn loyalty, had to provide protection, had to feed their people, had to justify their power. The divine mandate wasn't enough anymore. Competence mattered, character mattered, results mattered. This was Egypt's first revolution, not of weapons but of ideas. The absolute power of god-kings was questioned, the rights of common people asserted. The seeds of a different Egypt were planted in the ruins of the old. Death had been democratized. That's the simplest way to say it. In the Old Kingdom, only kings became gods after death. Only kings sailed with Ra. Only kings had pyramid texts to guide them. Everyone else. They hoped for the best. But now, in this time of chaos, ordinary people claimed what kings had monopolized. Not pyramids. Those required resources no one had. But the spells, the magic words, the maps of the afterlife. They painted them on coffin walls. We call them coffin texts. The afterlife for everyone. Walk through a provincial cemetery from this period. The tombs are simpler than royal pyramids, but inside the wooden coffins marvel at the decorations. Hieroglyphs cover every surface, spells for transformation, maps of the underworld, instructions for overcoming demons. The same journey kings took, now available to anyone who could afford a decorated coffin. I am one with Ra. I sail in his boat. I shine in the darkness. A merchant could say this now, a landowner, a successful craftsman, not just kings. The afterlife had become achievable. Death had lost some of its terror. The texts evolved from the royal pyramid texts, but changed. More personal, more varied. Where pyramid texts assumed royal power, coffin texts couldn't. They provided alternatives, multiple paths, options for different situations. The afterlife became complex, but navigable. Art changed too. Without royal workshops setting standards, local styles bloomed. In some places figures became elongated, stretched like shadows at sunset. In others they turned squat and solid. Colours varied, proportions shifted. The rigid perfection of Old Kingdom art relaxed into regional variety. Look at the paintings from Theban tombs. The colours are brighter, the scenes more lively. Farmers actually look like they're working. Cattle look like cattle, not idealized symbols. There's humour sometimes. A monkey stealing fruit, a cat stalking birds. Art became human. Provincial workshops couldn't match royal quality, but they had enthusiasm. They experimented. They showed what they saw, not what tradition demanded. A fisherman's face might show actual features, a particular nose, specific eyes, not the generic perfection of earlier art. Personality crept in. Literature exploded. Without royal control, writers wrote what they wanted. Stories appeared, real stories with plots and characters, the tale of the shipwrecked sailor, a man washed up on an island, meeting a giant talking snake, adventure and fantasy, entertainment, not just religious instruction. Poetry emerged, love songs, work songs, drinking songs. I will drink until I say, give me more. Human pleasures celebrated, human emotions explored. The strict formality of royal texts gave way to natural expression. Letters survive from this period. Personal letters, business letters, family matters. Send me the barley you promised. My children are hungry. Direct, urgent, real. Not the flowery phrases of official correspondence. People writing as people actually write. New gods appeared, or old gods became newly important, Osiris above all. The murdered god who rose again, who judged the dead, who offered hope to everyone. Not a distant solar deity like Ra, but a god who suffered, who died, who understood human pain. His worship spread everywhere. Local gods gained prominence. Every town had its patron, its special protector. These weren't abstract cosmic forces. They were neighbours, they lived in the local temple, they listened to local problems, they cared about specific people in specific places. Personal piety developed. People chose their gods, or amulets, made private offerings, prayed directly without priestly intermediation. Religion became personal, a relationship between individual and deity, not just state ritual performed by professionals. Magic flourished, protective spells, healing charms, love potions. Without strong central authority, people turned to supernatural protection. Amulets shaped like eyes, like scarabs, like gods, worn for luck, for health, for love, for protection against the chaos surrounding them. This cultural flowering grew from political collapse. When the old system died, creativity erupted. People found new ways to express themselves, new ways to seek meaning, new ways to face eternity. The first intermediate period was dark politically, but culturally, it blazed with new light. Change started small in Thebes. A family called the Intefs ruled the area. Not ancient nobility, just capable locals who kept order when others couldn't. They fed their people, protected trade, maintained temples, basic competence in chaotic times. The first Intef we know took the title Great Chief of Upper Egypt. Not king, not yet, just a strong local ruler, but his son grew bolder. Intef II called himself King of Upper and Lower Egypt. A claim, not reality. He controlled maybe 3 provinces, but ambition matters. Dreams shape futures. These early Theban rulers fought constantly. North against Heracleopolis, south against Nubian raiders, east and west against desert nomads. Small wars. Raids really. A town taken here, a border adjusted there. Slowly, patiently, they expanded their control. The real breakthrough came with Mentuhotep II. Around 2055 BCE, he inherited a strong regional kingdom. He would leave a united Egypt, the first ruler since the Old Kingdom to truly control both lands. His throne name meant the one who gives heart to the 2 lands, perfect choice. The war with Heracleopolis lasted years. Not dramatic battles, more like slow strangulation. Thebes controlled the grain supply from the south, cut off trade routes, made alliances with neighbouring provinces, offered better terms to wavering allies. Heracleopolis weakened year by year. The final battle happened around 2040 BCE. Details are scarce. We know Heracleopolis fell. Its dynasty ended. Mentuhotep II stood victorious. Egypt was one again. The 2 lands reunited. The intermediate period over. The Middle Kingdom begun. But Mentuhotep didn't just conquer. He rebuilt. At Deir el-Bahari across from Thebes, he constructed something new. Not a pyramid. That was old thinking. Northern thinking. Instead, a terraced temple built into the cliff face. Columns creating shade. Ramps leading upward. Gardens with transplanted trees. Architecture working with landscape, not dominating it. Inside, the most beautiful relief carvings. Mentuhotep embracing gods, receiving crowns, performing rituals, but also scenes of war, dead enemies, Nubian prisoners, the price of reunification carved in stone. This king didn't hide the violence that created peace. He reorganized the government, not the old system where governors became hereditary princes. New officials, appointed by the king, responsible to the king, moved regularly to prevent local power bases. Central control restored but wiser, more flexible, learning from past mistakes. Trade resumed, expeditions to Punt for incense, to Sinai for turquoise, to Nubia for gold. The wealth that built pyramids started flowing again, not as much as before, but enough. Enough to build, enough to impress, enough to show Egypt lived. In the provinces, he was clever. Local gods received royal attention. Local temples got royal gifts. Local traditions were respected. This wasn't the old kingdom's distant authority. This was partnership. The king and provinces working together, unity through cooperation, not just command. By his death around 2010 BCE, Egypt was transformed, stable, prosperous, united. The chaos was over, order restored, Maat triumphant. The experiment had worked. Egypt could fall apart and come together again. The two lands belonged together. Their separation was temporary illness, their unity was natural health. The Middle Kingdom would last 400 years. Not as long as the Old Kingdom, but long enough to create new literature, new art, new ideas about kingship, new ways of being Egyptian. The Dark Age had ended, but its lessons remained. Power must be earned. Justice matters. Even peasants have voices. The resurrection was complete, but Egypt was different. Older, wiser, more human. The pyramids still stood in the desert. Now they had company, new monuments, different styles. Egypt building again, creating again. Looking forward, not just back. The patient stones had waited through the darkness. Now they could shine again in the sun. The patient stones had waited through the darkness. Now they could shine again in the sun. But the sun that rose over the Middle Kingdom shone on a different Egypt, an Egypt that had learned from collapse, that understood power could vanish, that new unity was precious but fragile. Mentuhotep II had reunited Egypt. But unity wasn't enough. The country needed new ideas, new energy, new blood. It came from an unexpected source, a man named Amenemhat. Not royal blood, just a powerful official, the vizier, the king's right hand. When the last Mentuhotep died without strong heirs, Amenemhat took power. How? We don't know exactly, maybe peacefully, maybe not. But by 1985 BCE, he sat on the throne as Amenemhat III, first king of the 12th dynasty, the dynasty that would make the Middle Kingdom golden. Amenemhat had a problem. He wasn't legitimate, not descended from the ancient royal lines. Just a capable man who seized opportunity. In the Old Kingdom, this would have been impossible. Divine blood mattered above all. But the intermediate period had changed thinking. Competence mattered now. Results mattered. Still, he needed to justify his rule. Enter the prophecy of Nefertiti, a brilliant piece of propaganda disguised as ancient wisdom. The story claims to be from the Old Kingdom. A wise man predicts chaos will come, disorder, suffering. Then a saviour will arise, a man named Ameni from the south. He'll restore order, unite the lands, bring justice. Ameni was Amenemhat's nickname. The prophecy was written after he took power, made to look old, made to seem like destiny. Clever, very clever. If ancient prophecy foretold your rise, who could question it? The gods had planned this all along. But Amenemhat didn't rely on propaganda alone. He moved the capital, away from Thebes in the south, away from Memphis in the north, to a new city he built himself. Ijtawi, he called it. Caesar of the two lands. Located right where Upper and Lower Egypt met. The balance point. A capital that belonged to no region, that favoured no group. Fresh start, clean slate. The new capital meant new administration. Amenemhat reorganised everything. In the Old Kingdom, governors had become local kings. In the first intermediate period, they'd grown too powerful. Amenemhat found middle ground. Governors could govern, but they answered to the vizier. The vizier answered to the king. Clear chain of command. He divided the country into departments, like modern states or provinces, each with clear borders, clear responsibilities, clear tax obligations. No more vague traditional arrangements. Everything written down, everything recorded, order through organisation. 2 viziers now instead of one for Upper Egypt, one for Lower, each with their own staff, their own responsibilities, but both reporting to the king. Divide and supervise. No single official could grow too powerful, smart, careful, learning from history. The system worked. Taxes flowed regularly, justice was administered fairly, trade flourished, the country prospered. Not the wild wealth of the Pyramid Age, but steady prosperity, sustainable growth, the kind that lasts. With stability came culture. And what culture? The Middle Kingdom became Egypt's classical age. The time later Egyptians looked back to as perfect, when literature reached heights never equalled, when art found its truest expression, when Egypt was most fully itself. The writing from this period still amazes. Clear, direct, elegant, the language reached perfection. Not the archaic formulas of the Old Kingdom, not the experimental variety of the intermediate period, but balanced, refined, classical Middle Egyptian. The language taught to scribes for the next 1,000 years. Stories poured from scribal schools, the tale of the shipwrecked sailor, an official telling his master about survival on a magic island, meeting a golden snake who speaks wisdom, adventure mixed with philosophy, entertainment with meaning. The story of Sinuhe became Egypt's most beloved tale, an official who flees Egypt when the king dies, lives in exile, becomes successful abroad, but yearns for home, finally returns to die on Egyptian soil. Every Egyptian who heard it understood. Egypt was home. Nowhere else compared. Instructions proliferated. The instruction of Merikare, the instruction of Amenemhat, advice from kings to successors, but really advice for everyone, how to rule, how to live, how to be Egyptian. Be skilled in speech so that you will succeed. The tongue of a man is his sword. Speech is stronger than fighting. Even pessimistic literature flourished. The dispute of a man with his soul, a man arguing with his own spirit about suicide, dark thoughts, but beautifully expressed. Death is before me today like recovery to a sick man. The Middle Kingdom didn't hide from hard truths. It faced them, expressed them, transformed them into art. The real achievement was making high culture accessible. Old Kingdom literature was for kings and highest nobles. Middle Kingdom literature was for anyone literate. Scribes, merchants, military officers, the middle class that emerged from chaos. They read these texts, copied them, passed them on. Culture democratized like the afterlife had been. Amenemhat's successors built on his foundation, but none more than Senusret III. He ruled from 1878 to 1839 BCE, and he transformed Egypt from a defensive power to an aggressive empire, the warrior king of the Middle Kingdom. Nubia was the target, the land south of the First Cataract, rich in gold, fierce in warriors, a constant threat and constant temptation. Previous kings had raided Nubia, built occasional forts. But Senusret III decided to conquer and hold. He led campaign after campaign, not raids, systematic conquest. First secure the river, control the Nile, control movement, then build forts at strategic points, not temporary camps, permanent fortresses, massive, intimidating, effective. Walk through the ruins of Buhan Fortress today. Even ruined it impresses. Walls 30 feet high, 10 feet thick, bastions projecting to allow crossfire, a dry moat cut into bedrock, drawbridge entrance, barracks for hundreds of soldiers, storerooms for years of supplies. This wasn't just military architecture. This was psychological warfare. The message? Egypt is here to stay. 14 fortresses in total, stretching from the First to the Second Cataract. A chain of Egyptian power thrust deep into Africa. Each fort could support the others. Signal fires could call reinforcements. The Nile became an Egyptian highway, protected by Egyptian strongpoints. But Senusret understood conquest needs more than forts. It needs trade, economic integration. The fortresses became trading posts. Nubian gold flowed north. Egyptian goods flowed south, mutual benefit, mutual dependence, the best kind of control. He set up a remarkable system. The fortress commanders weren't just military men, they were administrators, judges, trade regulators. They learned Nubian languages, married Nubian women, created a hybrid culture, Egyptian-Nubian, loyal to both, serving Egypt by understanding Nubia. The army itself transformed. The Old Kingdom had militia. Farmers called up when needed. The first intermediate period had local forces, but Senusret III created professional soldiers, men who trained year-round, who knew tactics, who could march in formation, fight as units, Egypt's first real army. Back home, engineering projects matched military ambitions. The Fayum, a large depression west of the Nile, became the focus. Fed by a Nile branch but poorly managed, swampy, malarial, underused. Senusret III and his successors changed that. They dug new channels, built regulators to control water flow, drained swamps, created fields, turned wasteland into Egypt's most productive region. The Fayum became a garden, fed by controlled irrigation, protected by careful management, engineering creating wealth from nothing. The project took generations, but think of the result. Thousands of new acres, tens of thousands of new farmers, more food, more taxes, more soldiers. The Fayum development funded Nubian conquest. Conquest protected development, the cycle of power. Trade expeditions reached farther than ever. To Punt, the incense land, probably modern Somalia or Eritrea, ships sailed down the Red Sea, traded for myrrh and frankincense, for gold and ebony, for exotic animals, gifts for temples, luxuries for nobles, proof of royal reach. To the Levant, the eastern Mediterranean coast, cedar from Lebanon, purple dye from Phoenicia, olive oil from Palestine. Not conquest here. Trade agreements, diplomatic relations. Egypt engaged with the wider world as equal, not conqueror. The Sinai mines worked overtime, turquoise for jewellery, copper for tools and weapons, harsh conditions, terrible heat, but profitable. Egyptian expeditions left inscriptions, prayers to Hathor, Lady of Turquoise, records of success, boasts of endurance. Humans conquering hostile landscape for wealth. All this activity needed coordination, planning, record-keeping. The Middle Kingdom bureaucracy expanded to match, everything written down, every expedition recorded, every trade tallied, papyrus covered with neat hieratic script, the cursive form of hieroglyphs, faster to write, more practical, the script of empire. One remarkable survival shows this world, the Reisner papyri, accounting documents from a royal dockyard, lists of materials, work assignments, payment records, boring to read. But they show the machine behind the glory. Hundreds of workers, thousands of details, all organised, all recorded, all functioning smoothly. This was the Middle Kingdom difference. Not just individual achievements, but systems, sustainable systems. The Old Kingdom built pyramids through royal will, impressive but exhausting. The Middle Kingdom built institutions, less dramatic but more lasting. Egypt had grown up. The Middle Kingdom gave Egypt a human face. Look at a statue from this period. Compare it to Old Kingdom work. The difference strikes immediately. Old Kingdom faces are perfect, idealized, eternal. Middle Kingdom faces are real, lined, tired, human. Take the portraits of Senusret III, the warrior king who conquered Nubia. His statues show a worn face, deep lines beside the mouth, pouches under the eyes, large ears that stick out slightly. This is what he looked like. Not what kingship should look like. What one man actually looked like. Revolutionary honesty in stone. Why this change? Because Egypt had suffered, had learned, had grown. The perfect confidence of the Old Kingdom was gone, replaced by wisdom, by awareness of time's passage, of power's burden. The art reflected the age, more honest, more touching, more true. Private statues showed the same humanity. A scribe sitting cross-legged, belly rolling over his kilt, face concentrated on work, not idealized, just a man doing his job, captured forever in stone. We can imagine meeting him, talking with him. He's not a symbol, he's a person. The painting's too changed. In the tomb of Khnumhotep at Beni Hassan, marvel at the details. A caravan of Asiatics bringing eye paint to Egypt, each figure individual, different clothes, different hairstyles, different faces. One man plays a lyre, another leads a donkey, children ride on their parents' shoulders, real people doing real things. Colours became more subtle, not the bold primary colours of the Old Kingdom, but graduated shades, shadows, depth. Artists observed how light actually fell, how colours actually looked. They painted what they saw, not what tradition dictated. The mathematical papyri from this period show Egypt's scientific mind. The Rin Papyrus, our best mathematical text, problems and solutions, how to calculate the area of a field, the volume of a granary, the slope of a pyramid, practical mathematics, but sophisticated. They understood fractions, geometric progressions, even basic algebra. The medical papyri are equally impressive. The Edwin Smith Papyrus describes surgical procedures, examining wounds, setting bones, recognizing when cases are hopeless. An ailment I will treat. An ailment I will contend with. An ailment not to be treated. Honest assessment, scientific approach. These were real doctors, not just magicians. They described the brain, the first time in human history. They noticed brain injuries affected body movement. They didn't understand why, but they observed, recorded, began the long journey to medical knowledge, starting with careful observation, the scientific method being born. Daily life comes alive in Middle Kingdom texts. The town of Karhun, built for pyramid workers, excavated completely. We can walk its streets, enter its houses, large houses for officials, 4 rooms, a courtyard, painted walls, small houses for workers, 2 rooms, shared courtyard, but both types solid, well built, comfortable. In the houses, archaeologists found everything: furniture, clothing, toys, cosmetics, letters, legal documents, birth control prescriptions, crocodile dung and honey, probably ineffective but shows they tried. Real life preserved in desert sand. 1 letter from a soldier to his family. I am sending you barley by boat. Make bread for the children. Don't let them go hungry. I think of you every day. Simple words, eternal feelings. A father caring for his children across 3,000 years. The story of Sinuhe reached its final form in this period, but many other stories joined it. The tale of the eloquent peasant. Teaching justice through entertainment. The story of the shipwrecked sailor. Adventure with philosophical undertones. The tales of wonder. Magic and marvels for pure enjoyment. These weren't religious texts, not instruction manuals, just stories, told for pleasure, copied because people enjoyed them. Literature had discovered its purpose: to entertain, to move, to make people think, to help them escape, to show them truth through fiction. The Middle Kingdom ended around 1650 BCE, not in dramatic collapse like the Old Kingdom, more like slow dissolution. The strong 12th dynasty gave way to the weaker 13th. Too many kings, too short reigns. The machinery of government continued. But leadership faltered. In the Delta, something new was happening. Foreigners were settling. Peaceful at first. Traders, craftsmen, refugees from troubled lands. They kept their own customs, worshipped their own gods, slowly grew in numbers, slowly gained power. The Hyksos, Egyptians would call them, foreign rulers. The second intermediate period was approaching, but that darkness lay ahead. For 400 years the Middle Kingdom had shown Egypt at its best. Not the megalomaniac monument building of the Old Kingdom, but sustainable achievement, good government, just law, beautiful art, profound literature, human dignity. The classical age had earned its name. Later Egyptians would copy Middle Kingdom texts word for word, would study Middle Kingdom art for inspiration, would remember Middle Kingdom prosperity with nostalgia. This was Ma'at in practice: order, justice, beauty, truth. The ideals made real. Walk through any museum's Egyptian collection. The pieces that touch you most? Often Middle Kingdom, because they show people like us, facing life with courage, creating beauty from difficulty, finding meaning in daily life, building not just for eternity but for today. The most human age of ancient Egypt, the age that speaks most clearly across time. In the Delta, something new was happening. The foreigners who had settled peacefully were no longer so foreign, no longer so peaceful. They had a name now: Hyksos. It meant rulers of foreign lands. But the story of how they took power isn't what Egyptian propaganda later claimed. Forget the invasion myth. No barbarian hordes sweeping down from the north. No battles destroying Egyptian armies. The truth was slower, less dramatic, more interesting. The Hyksos took Egypt the way winter takes autumn, gradually, day by day, until one morning you wake up and everything has changed. They came from the Levant, modern Palestine, Syria, Lebanon. Some were traders who stayed, some were craftsmen seeking work, some were refugees from wars back home. The Eastern Delta had always welcomed foreigners. Good farmland, good trade routes, good opportunities. Why go home when life was better here? By 1650 BCE, they weren't foreigners anymore. They were locals who happened to speak a different language at home, who worshipped different gods in private, who had different names, but they farmed Egyptian land, paid Egyptian taxes, followed Egyptian law. Their children grew up more Egyptian than Levantine. Then the Middle Kingdom weakened. Too many kings, too short reigns. The government in Ijtawi lost control of the provinces. Local strongmen emerged. Some were Egyptian, some were Hyksos. In the Eastern Delta, the Hyksos strongmen were simply better organized, better connected, better armed. They had something Egyptians didn't: horses, war chariots, new bronze weapons, composite bows that shot farther, scale armor that protected better. Not superior technology exactly, just different. And in troubled times, different can mean victorious. The takeover was probably peaceful. The weak Egyptian kings couldn't project power into the Delta. The Hyksos leaders already controlled the region economically. Political control followed naturally. One day there was an Egyptian governor in the Eastern Delta. The next day a Hyksos king. No apocalypse, just a change in management. Their capital was Avaris. Modern Tel El Daba. Archaeologists have excavated it extensively. What they found surprises. Not a foreign fortress imposed on Egypt, but a genuinely multicultural city. Egyptian temples next to Levantine shrines, Egyptian houses mixed with Levantine styles, Minoan frescoes on palace walls, a cosmopolitan metropolis. The Hyksos kings took Egyptian throne names, performed Egyptian rituals, built in Egyptian style. The average farmer probably didn't notice the change. Taxes still came due, the Nile still flooded, life continued. Just the accent of the tax collector might be different. They even improved some things. Trade with the Levant flourished, obviously. The rulers had family connections there. New crops arrived, new technologies, new ideas. The isolated Egypt of the Middle Kingdom opened to the wider Mediterranean world. Not by choice, but the result wasn't all negative. Walk through Avaris at its height. The palace district gleams with painted walls, bulls leaping, acrobats jumping, scenes from Crete, that island of artists. The harbour bustles with ships, cedar from Lebanon, oil from Palestine, wine from the Aegean. Languages mix in the streets, Egyptian, Semitic, Minoan, maybe others. In the workshops, craftsmen blend traditions, Egyptian shapes with Levantine decoration, Levantine weapons with Egyptian metalwork, new styles emerging from mixture. Scarabs, those beetle amulets Egyptians loved, carved with foreign names in Egyptian style, cultural fusion in miniature. The Hyksos kept Egyptian administration. Why change what works? Egyptian scribes wrote Egyptian documents for Hyksos kings. Egyptian priests performed Egyptian rituals. Egyptian farmers farmed Egyptian fields. The superstructure changed. The foundation remained. They worshipped Seth. Not the Egyptian chaos god exactly, but their own storm god dressed in Seth's clothing. Syncretism, scholars call it. Making foreign gods wear local masks. It worked. Egyptians could see Seth being honoured. Hyksos could worship their Baal. Everyone satisfied. Sort of. The Hyksos ruled Lower Egypt for about a century. Not the disaster later propaganda painted. Not a golden age either. Just a different chapter. Foreign rulers who became partially Egyptian. Egyptian culture that became partially foreign. The two lands weren't united, but they weren't destroyed either. In the south, Egyptian kings still ruled from Thebes. Weak kings of the 16th dynasty, then stronger ones of the 17th. They controlled Upper Egypt, paid tribute to the Hyksos, waited, watched, grew slowly stronger. The ancient pattern would repeat. Southern kings would reunite the two lands. But first they had to learn to fight like their enemies. With horses, with chariots, with new tactics for a new age. Thebes had shrunk. Once capital of the Middle Kingdom's glory, now it ruled maybe 8 provinces, a rump state. The 17th dynasty kings called themselves lords of the two lands. But they weren't. They were local rulers paying tribute to foreign overlords. It rankled, it burned, it motivated. For generations an uneasy balance held. The Hyksos ruled the north from Avaris. The Thebans ruled the south. In between, a buffer zone of semi-independent towns. Trade flowed. Tribute was paid. Peace of a sort prevailed. Not comfortable peace, but peace nonetheless. The Theban court preserved Egyptian traditions fiercely. More Egyptian than Egypt, you might say. When the north adapted foreign ways, the south became more traditionally Egyptian in response. Stricter rituals, purer art styles, aggressive cultural conservatism. We are the true Egypt, they insisted. The north is corrupted, polluted, false. Then came Seqenenretau. Tau the Brave, his name meant. He ruled around 1560 BCE, and he decided tribute and submission weren't acceptable anymore. We don't know what triggered the war. Later legend speaks of insults, of religious disputes, of Hyksos arrogance. But legends lie. Maybe Tau simply saw weakness, opportunity, a chance for glory. The war went badly. We know because we have Tau's mummy. His skull shows horrific wounds, a mace blow above the forehead, an axe wound behind the ear, a spear thrust through the skull. He died violently, in battle probably. His face twisted in final agony. Even the embalmers couldn't hide it. But his death lit a fire. His widow Ahotep ruled as regent. His son Kamose took the throne young and angry. The War of Liberation had begun. Not just a war for territory, a holy war. Egypt against foreign pollution, Ma'at against chaos. The rhetoric was powerful. The reality was brutal. Kamose left us his own account, carved on stele at Karnak Temple, boastful, violent, but probably true in outline. He complains bitterly about the situation. I sit between an Asiatic and a Nubian. Each man has his slice of Egypt. Sharing the country with foreigners was intolerable, unnatural. It had to end. He struck north without warning. Not the seasonal raiding of previous conflicts, total war. His fleet sailed down the Nile while his army marched along the banks. Towns that resisted were destroyed. I razed their towns and burned their places. No mercy for collaborators. Egyptian or foreign, if you served the Hyksos, you were the enemy. The campaign reached Avaris itself. Kamose couldn't take the fortified capital, but he devastated its surroundings, cut off trade, destroyed crops, intercepted a letter from the Hyksos king to Nubian allies. The net was tightening. The Hyksos were learning what Thebans had always known. The river flows north. Control the south, and you control the river. Control the river, and you control Egypt. But Kamose died young, maybe in battle, maybe illness. His mummy hasn't been found, the liberation incomplete, the Hyksos wounded but not defeated. The dream of united Egypt still just a dream. Once again, everything depended on a boy king and a regent queen, Amos and Ahotep, son and mother, the future and the wisdom to guide it. These Theban resistance fighters weren't the cultured kings of the Middle Kingdom. They were harder, fiercer, shaped by generations of resentment, of perceived humiliation. They'd learned from their enemies, adopted the horse and chariot, improved their bronze weapons, created a military machine designed for one purpose, driving out the foreigners, reclaiming Egypt, making the two lands one, under Theban rule, of course. The propaganda from this period is revealing. Constant emphasis on purity, on tradition, on foreign pollution. The Hyksos become not just enemies but cosmic forces of chaos. Their expulsion isn't just political necessity but religious duty. This rhetoric would shape Egyptian thinking for centuries. Foreign meant dangerous. Unity meant survival. The lessons of the Second Intermediate Period burned deep. Ahmose was a child when he became king, around 1550 BCE. His mother Ahotep ruled as regent, a remarkable woman. She united the soldiers of Egypt, one text says. She cared for Egypt. When her son was ready, she'd preserved a kingdom for him, and an army, and a dream of liberation. The final war took time, maybe 10 years, maybe more. Amos was methodical where Kamose was passionate. He secured Upper Egypt completely first, made sure no rebellion could threaten his rear, then moved north systematically, town by town, nome by nome, building loyalty, creating infrastructure. This wasn't raiding. This was conquest meant to last. The siege of Avaris was epic. The Hyksos capital was strong. Massive walls, good water supply, access to the sea for reinforcements. Amos tried direct assault. Failed. Tried blockade. Partially worked. Finally he did what Egyptians do best. He used the river. Canals diverted. Flooding controlled. The city's strength became weakness. Water, Egypt's life-giver, became a weapon. Avaris fell around 1540 BCE. The Hyksos king fled to Palestine. Amos followed. Besieged the fortress of Sharohen for 3 years. Maybe 6. Sources disagree. But the message was clear. You can run from Egypt. You can't escape Egypt. Not anymore. The Thebans had learned the danger of leaving enemies on borders. Better to push them far away. Create buffer zones. Project Power. With the Hyksos expelled, Ahmose faced a bigger challenge: reuniting Egypt. The Delta had been under foreign rule for a century. Local powers had emerged. Old loyalties had shifted. Military conquest was one thing. Political reunification was another. He was brilliant at it. No mass punishments for collaboration. No purges. If you accepted Theban rule, the past was forgotten. Egyptian administrators who'd served the Hyksos could serve Ahmose. Their experience was valuable. Their local knowledge essential. Pragmatism over vengeance. But changes came. The old Middle Kingdom system was gone. Too weak. Too trusting. The new kingdom would be different. A military state. Professional armies always ready. Foreign policy aggressive, not defensive. The lesson of the Hyksos was learned. Never again would foreigners rule Egypt. Better to rule them first. Ahmose rebuilt temples, restored monuments, showed the gods had returned to Egypt. Maat was restored. Order triumphant. The nightmare was over. Egypt was Egyptian again. United. Strong. Ready to face the world not as victim but as conqueror. He reformed the military completely. The chariot corps became elite units. Professional soldiers, not farmer militia. Training constant. Weapons standardized. Tactics practiced. Egypt had been a peaceful civilization forced to learn war. Now it was a military power that happened to have culture. The transformation was complete. Queen Ahotep lived to see triumph. Her tomb goods survive. Military honors, golden flies, awards for valor, ceremonial weapons. This queen mother had been more than regent. She'd been war leader, strategy maker, the power behind two thrones. Without her, there might be no new kingdom, no Egyptian empire, no Tutankhamun for us to discover. When Ahmose died around 1525 BCE, he left a united, militarized Egypt, ready for empire, ready for glory. The second intermediate period was over. The new kingdom had begun. The age of warrior pharaohs was dawning. Egypt would never be conquered again, not for 1,000 years. The lesson had been learned. Unity through strength, peace through power. The Hyksos, unwittingly, had created the Egyptian empire. The age of warrior pharaohs was dawning. Egypt would never be conquered again, not for 1,000 years. The lesson had been learned. Unity through strength, peace through power. The Hyksos unwittingly had created the Egyptian empire. Ahmose's son Amenhotep I continued the work, securing borders, strengthening administration, building temples. But it was Thutmose the one who showed Egypt's true power. He ruled from 1504 to 1492 BCE, and he decided Egypt's borders should be as far as Egyptian armies could march. North he went first, through Palestine, through Syria, through Lebanon. Egyptian chariots rolled where Egyptian feet had never stepped. The pharaoh's standards were planted beside the Euphrates River, the great river of Mesopotamia, the edge of the known world. Here Thutmose set up a stone marker. The boundary of Egypt, it proclaimed, not the Nile Delta anymore, but the Euphrates Bend. Think about this journey. From Thebes to the Euphrates is over 800 miles, through desert, through hostile territory, with Bronze Age logistics, every grain of food carried, every drop of water planned, every mile contested. The achievement staggers. Rome at its height barely managed such distances. Alexander needed genius and luck, but Thutmose did it with methodical Egyptian patience. The army that marched north wasn't the same that expelled the Hyksos. This was professional, organized, equipped. Chariots formed the elite, two-man crews, driver and archer, bronze-fitted wheels, leather-reinforced cars, horses trained for battle, the finest military technology of the age. Infantry marched in formation, bronze weapons standardized, shields uniform, training constant. Not farmers called from fields. These men knew no trade but war. They were Egypt's sword arm, disciplined, deadly, confident. But Thutmose died young. His son was younger, too young to rule alone. So the boy's stepmother became regent. Her name was Hatshepsut. She would become something unprecedented, a female pharaoh, a woman who would rule Egypt for 22 years. At first, she was traditional. The queen mother guiding a child king. Statues show her behind the boy Thutmose III. protective, maternal, proper. But gradually something changed. The inscriptions shift. The Queen Mother becomes the senior partner, then the main partner, finally the only partner that matters. Around her 7th year as regent, Hatshepsut did the unthinkable. She claimed the full pharaonic titles, put on the false beard of kingship, wore the double crown, became officially King of Egypt, not Queen, King, male titles, male regalia, male royal ideology, a woman ruling as a man. Why? We don't know. Maybe Thutmose III was weak. Maybe threats demanded strong leadership. Maybe she simply could. Power sometimes creates its own justification. She was effective. Egypt prospered. The gods seemed satisfied. Results matter more than precedent. Her reign was peaceful. No great campaigns, no military adventures. Instead, trade expeditions. The most famous went to Punt, that mysterious land of incense and gold, probably modern Somalia. Ships sailed down the Red Sea, brought back myrrh trees, frankincense, baboons, leopards, ivory, ebony, the exotic products of Africa. She built like no pharaoh before her. At Karnak Temple, 2 great obelisks, pink granite from Aswan, cut in 7 months, transported 200 miles, raised into position, each 97 feet tall, still standing today, still impressive after 3.5 millennia. But her masterpiece was Deir el-Bahari, the mortuary temple on the west bank at Thebes, not a pyramid, not a traditional temple, something new, terraces carved into the cliff face, columns creating shade, ramps leading upward, gardens with transplanted trees, architecture that worked with landscape instead of dominating it. The reliefs inside tell her story, the divine birth scenes, Amun, the king of gods, choosing her before birth, making her legitimacy divine, the Punt expedition carved in detail, soldiers loading ships, exotic trees being transplanted, the Queen of Punt greeting Egyptian ambassadors, a complete narrative in stone. These weren't just decorations, they were arguments, proof of legitimacy, evidence of success, propaganda in the most beautiful form. Look, they said, the gods chose me, Egypt prospers under me, the traditional order is maintained, I am the rightful pharaoh. For 22 years it worked. Egypt was peaceful, prosperous, secure. Temples were built, trade flourished. The arts reached new heights. Justice was administered. Mahat prevailed. By any measure, successful rule. But Thutmose III was growing up, learning statecraft, learning warfare, waiting. When Hatshepsut died in 1458 BCE, he took power immediately. No struggle, no civil war. The transition was smooth, but bitter feelings remained. Thutmose III began systematically erasing her memory. Her statues were smashed, her cartouches chiselled out, her obelisks walled up. Not immediately, but eventually, as if she'd never existed. The female pharaoh became a historical embarrassment, an anomaly to be forgotten. But he kept her policies where they worked. The same officials served both reigns. The same trade routes operated, the same building projects continued. Smart rulers preserve what succeeds, even if they despise its source. Then Thutmose turned his attention abroad. 17 campaigns he would lead, each meticulously recorded, each adding to Egyptian power. The boy who'd waited in Hatshepsut's shadow became Egypt's greatest military pharaoh. His first campaign targeted Megiddo, a fortified city controlling the pass between Egypt and Mesopotamia. The coalition of Canaanite princes thought Egyptian power had weakened during Hatshepsut's peaceful reign. They were wrong. The Battle of Megiddo was tactical brilliance. The enemy expected Egyptian forces to take the easy route, the wide, safe road around the mountains. Instead, Thutmose led his army through a narrow mountain pass. Dangerous, risky, unexpected. He emerged behind enemy lines while they watched the wrong road. The coalition army collapsed. The princes fled into Megiddo's walls. Thutmose besieged the city for 7 months. When it fell, the booty staggered. Gold, silver, horses, chariots. The wealth of Syria spread before Egyptian feet. More than that. The cities of Palestine saw Egyptian power. They submitted without fighting. Campaign followed campaign. Each year, Thutmose marched north, not conquest for its own sake. Strategic thinking, control the trade routes, secure the resources, create loyal vassals, build an empire that would pay for itself. By his final campaign, Egyptian power reached its zenith. From Nubia in the south to the Euphrates in the north, from Libya in the west to the Iraqi desert in the east, the largest empire the world had yet seen, all controlled from Thebes, all paying tribute to one man, the pharaoh, the living god, the master of the known world. By the time Amenhotep III took the throne in 1391 BCE, war had become unnecessary. The empire was established. Tribute flowed like the Nile flood. Regular, predictable, abundant. Egypt could afford to be magnificent, and magnificent it became. This king never campaigned, never led armies, never conquered territory. He didn't need to. His ambassadors carried Egyptian power in leather pouches, diplomatic correspondence, trade agreements, marriage negotiations, power expressed through gold and gifts rather than bronze and blood. The letters survive, the Amarna archive, nearly 400 tablets in cuneiform script, the diplomatic language of the time, written by scribes in Babylon, Assyria, Mitanni, Hatti, all the great powers writing to Egypt, not as equals, as supplicants. Egypt was the superpower. Everyone else wanted Egyptian gold. "Send me gold. Much gold," writes the king of Babylon, "for gold is as dust in your land." The Babylonian king needed Egyptian gold for a building project. He flattered. He wheedled. He reminded Amenhotep of past friendship. All for more gold. The richest king in Mesopotamia begging Egypt for treasure. From Mitanni came marriage proposals. The king offered his daughter to cement alliance. Not unusual, but then he asked for an Egyptian princess in return. Amenhotep's response survives. Polite, but firm. Egyptian royal women don't marry foreigners. Ever. Egypt gives wives. Egypt doesn't provide them. The balance of power made clear in marriage negotiations. The letters reveal Egypt's wealth. Gifts flowing constantly. Gold jewellery to Babylon, ebony furniture to Assyria, linen clothing to Hatti, ships and chariots to Cyprus. Egypt as the gift-giver of the ancient world. Buying loyalty, securing peace, showing power through generosity. At home, the wealth showed everywhere. Temples grew like flowers after rain. Luxor Temple, additions to Karnak, shrines scattered across Egypt. Not defensive fortifications, not practical buildings. Pure beauty. Architecture as art. Stone carved like jewellery. Columns painted in brilliant colours. Gold leaf gleaming in temple darkness. Private wealth matched royal spending. Nobles' tombs at Thebes rival pharaohs' monuments. Vast underground chambers. Walls covered in paintings. Scenes of banqueting, hunting. Daily life elevated to art. The afterlife imagined as eternal party. Wealth so secure it could be buried in graves. Look at the tomb of Nebamun. A scribe. Not even high nobility. Just a successful bureaucrat. But his tomb paintings glow with life. Hunting birds in the marshes, his wife beside him, his daughter gathering lotus flowers. The Nile teeming with fish. Egypt as paradise. Life as continuous pleasure. The art reached heights never equalled. Not the formal perfection of the Old Kingdom, not the honest realism of the Middle Kingdom. Something new. Elegant, sophisticated, confident. Artists who knew they were the best in the world, creating for patrons who could afford perfection. Foreign influences crept in, pleasantly, peacefully. Minoan artists working in Egyptian palaces. Nubian gold workers learning Egyptian techniques. Syrian musicians playing in Egyptian courts. The empire wasn't just political, it was cultural. Ideas flowing like trade goods. Innovation through contact. Women gained prominence. Not just queens, noble women, merchant women. Even servant women appear in art as individuals, not symbols. The strict gender roles of earlier periods relaxed slightly. Prosperity allowing experimentation. Confidence permitting change. The international style emerged. Art that could be understood from Memphis to Babylon. Common symbols. Shared techniques, elite culture becoming cosmopolitan, Egypt leading but not isolated, connected to the wider world through taste as well as trade. Technology advanced quietly, better bronze alloys, more efficient irrigation, improved shipbuilding. Glassmaking reached new heights. Egyptian glass workers created vessels of incredible delicacy, transparent, coloured, shaped like natural forms. Luxury items traded across the known world. Medical knowledge expanded. The Edwin Smith papyrus was copied and studied. New treatments developed. Surgery improved. The Egyptians became famous for medical skill. Foreign kings requested Egyptian doctors, another export, another source of soft power. Mathematics served architecture. Engineers calculated loads and stresses. Surveyors laid out temple complexes with astronomical precision. The pyramids had been engineering triumphs. New Kingdom temples were mathematical poems, beauty achieved through calculation, art guided by science. Palace life became incredibly elaborate. The king's daily routine was ritual theatre, rising like the sun god Ra, bathing in sacred pools, dressing in gold and linen, every action symbolic, every moment meaningful. The pharaoh as living god made visible through ceremony. Festivals multiplied. Opet festival connecting Luxor and Karnak temples. Beautiful feast of the valley honouring the dead. Month-long celebrations with processions, music, dancing, feasting, the kingdom celebrating itself. Wealth displayed as religious duty. Prosperity honoured through party. The bureaucracy grew sophisticated. Departments for everything. Foreign affairs, royal works, treasury, military, granaries, each with trained specialists. Career paths for ambitious young scribes. Government as smooth machine. Administration as art form. Record-keeping reached obsessive levels. Every jar of oil counted, every head of cattle noted, every foreign tribute listed. Thousands of papyri documenting imperial wealth. The Wilbur Papyrus alone records landholdings for dozens of temples. Acre by acre. Owner by owner. Detail that would impress modern accountants. International marriage became policy, not love matches, state alliances, foreign princesses joining the royal harem, not as queens. Egyptian royal blood stayed pure, but as honoured wives. Their children raised Egyptian, their loyalties secured through family ties. The royal workshops produced wonders, furniture inlaid with ivory and gold, jewellery that required magnifying glasses to appreciate fully, weapons that were art pieces, chariots decorated like mobile temples, craftsmen pushing materials to their limits, excellence as standard operating procedure. Trade networks spanned the known world, Egyptian merchants in Crete, Nubian gold workers in Memphis, Lebanese cedar cutters in Egyptian employ, the empire as economic system, wealth flowing along established routes, security provided by Egyptian power, prosperity shared but centered in Egypt. Even religion relaxed slightly. Traditional gods remained supreme, but foreign deities found welcome. Syncretism flourished. Isis Hathor combining Egyptian and Nubian elements. Tas-Sokar Osiris merging Memphis and Abydos traditions. Divine flexibility matching political success. This was Egypt's golden age. Not the monumental achievements of the pyramid builders, not the literary flowering of the Middle Kingdom, but sheer wealth, luxury, international prestige, the good life available to anyone with talent and ambition, social mobility through imperial service, merit rewarded with gold. Amenhotep III ruled for 38 years, nearly 4 decades of peace and prosperity. He died around 1353 BCE, passing the throne to his son, a young man with different ideas, dangerous ideas, revolutionary ideas. The Golden Age was ending, change was coming, the kind of change that shakes empires to their foundations. The young king who took power in 1353 BCE wasn't satisfied with Golden Age prosperity. His name was Amenhotep IV. He would change it to Akhenaten. The name meant beneficial to the Aten. The Aten was the sun disk, and this king would try to make it Egypt's only god. No pharaoh had ever attempted anything like this. Egypt had hundreds of gods, thousands if you counted local variations. Amun-Ra reigned as king of gods, but below him, vast hierarchies. Gods for every town, every trade, every human need. Families worshipped household gods. Regions honoured their patron deities. Pharaohs built temples to dozens of different powers. Akhenaten said no. One god only, the Aten, the visible sun disk from which all life flowed. Not the sun god Ra with his human head and divine body, just the disk itself, pure light, pure energy, pure truth. Everything else was false, corrupt, unnecessary. The revolution began gradually. First, just more attention to the Aten, new temples, special festivals, different emphasis. Traditional Egyptians probably thought it was a phase. Young kings often had enthusiasms, they usually passed. But this didn't pass, it intensified. By his 6th year, Akhenaten was closing traditional temples, dismissing priests, redirecting temple income to Aten worship. The economic impact was staggering. Temple complexes employed thousands, fed communities, provided social services, all suddenly stopped. Then came the new capital. Akhetaten, he called it. The horizon of the Aten, modern Amarna, built from nothing in the middle of Egypt, halfway between Memphis and Thebes. Magnificent, strange, unlike any Egyptian city before or after. The move wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. Breaking with the past, starting fresh, creating a new Egypt for a new god. The court packed up and moved. Thousands of officials, craftsmen, soldiers, servants, a whole city transplanted to virgin desert. Amarna art was revolutionary too. Gone was the formal perfection of traditional Egyptian style. Instead, naturalism, realism. The royal family shown as real people. Akhenaten's elongated skull, his potbelly, his feminine hips, Queen Nefertiti's elegant neck, their daughters playing like normal children. Family scenes everywhere. The king and queen eating together, playing with their children, kissing under the Aten's rays. Unprecedented intimacy. Royal humanity on public display. Divine pharaohs shown as loving parents. The formal distance between king and subject narrowed dramatically. The Aten was different from traditional gods. No human form, no animal shape, no stories of birth or death or adventure. Just the sun disk with rays ending in hands. Hands that offered life to the royal family. Hands that blessed Egypt through the king. Abstract, intellectual, pure. Worship changed completely. No statues in dark temple chambers, no mysterious rituals, no priestly intermediaries, just open courts where sunlight streamed down, simple altars for offerings, direct communication between worshipper and god, the Aten visible to all, available to all, through the king, of course. The famous hymn to the Aten shows this new theology. How manifold are thy works! They are hidden from the face of man, O sole God, like whom there is no other. Thou didst create the world according to thy desire. One God, one creator, one source of all life. Monotheism may be the first in human history, but Egypt resisted. Priests lost their livelihoods, temple workers lost their jobs, traditional believers lost their gods. The provinces sent less tribute, foreign vassals grew restless, the empire creaked under ideological strain. Nefertiti disappeared from records around year 12, died, divorced, fled. We don't know. Akhenaten took a co-ruler, possibly his daughter, possibly his son. Gender unclear in surviving records, the royal succession became confused, dangerous in a monarchy. When Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, his revolution died with him. The boy king who followed took the name Tutankhamun, living image of Amun, not Aten, Amun, the old king of gods. Restoration had begun. Tutankhamun was maybe 9 years old. Real power lay with advisors, men who'd survived the revolution by bending. Now they straightened, temples reopened, priests returned, traditional festivals resumed. The Aten didn't disappear immediately, but it faded, became one god among many, then just a memory. The boy king's tomb, discovered intact in 1922, shows the transition. Some objects still bear Aten symbols. Most honor traditional gods, Amun-Ra, Osiris, Ptah. The old pantheon welcoming back their pharaoh. Gold and jewels buying divine forgiveness. Wealth smoothing religious revolution. Amarna was abandoned. The new capital became a ghost town. Desert sand covering revolutionary art, covering religious experiment, covering the evidence of Egypt's strangest pharaoh. Later kings would pretend he'd never existed. Heretic. Unmentionable. The pharaoh who nearly broke Egypt. But ideas, once released, don't disappear completely. The Aten hymn influenced later psalms. The concept of one universal God entered human thought. Religious revolution failed in Egypt, but succeeded elsewhere. Eventually, the failed pharaoh's god would conquer the world, just not as he intended. Egypt returned to normal, multiple gods, complex theology, priestly hierarchies, traditional art, conservative values. The Golden Age resumed, sort of. But something had changed. Royal authority had been questioned. Religious certainty had cracked. Imperial power had wavered. The revolution was over. Its consequences had just begun. After Tutankhamun's early death, Egypt needed strong leadership. The empire was fraying, foreign vassals had grown independent, traditional enemies were stirring, internal stability required external success, the old pattern. Strength abroad meant security at home. The leadership came from an unexpected source. Military officers, not ancient royal blood, just capable soldiers who seized opportunity. The Ramessid dynasty, named for their greatest king, Rameses II, the pharaoh who would rule for 67 years, who would build more monuments than any king before him, who would fight the greatest battle of the Bronze Age. Rameses II took power in 1279 BCE, young, ambitious, determined to restore Egyptian glory. His first campaigns went north, through Palestine, through Syria, reclaiming territory lost during the Amarna period, showing the world that Egypt was strong again. The confrontation came at Kadesh, a fortified city on the Orontes River, controlled by Egypt's greatest rival, the Hittite Empire, based in modern Turkey, masters of iron weapons, creators of the first great empire of the Iron Age. Kadesh would decide who controlled the Middle East. The battle nearly ended in Egyptian disaster. Rameses, leading from the front, rode into a Hittite trap. Enemy chariots surrounded his advance guard. The pharaoh found himself cut off, outnumbered, facing death or capture. The empire hung in balance, but Rameses fought his way out. Personal courage, divine protection, military skill, take your pick. The Egyptian reinforcements arrived. The battle turned. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides learned respect. The greatest powers of the age had fought to stalemate. 20 years later, they made peace. The first written peace treaty in history. Rameses married a Hittite princess. The Hittite king promised eternal friendship. Trade resumed, borders stabilized. Egypt and Hatti divided the Middle East between them. Peaceful coexistence through mutual exhaustion. The treaty marked a new age, not expansion through conquest, but security through diplomacy. Egypt would still fight, but carefully, selectively, against enemies who couldn't fight back effectively. The age of easy victories was ending, the age of careful calculation beginning. Rameses used peace for building. Abu Simbel in Nubia showed Egyptian power to the south. 2 temples carved from living rock, the great temple for Rameses himself, 4 colossal statues, each 65 feet high, the king as giant, as god, as eternal ruler, the smaller temple for his queen Nefertari. Love matched with power, beauty serving politics. Inside the great temple the walls tell stories. The Battle of Kadesh made eternal in stone, Rameses charging alone against thousands, the gods protecting him, victory snatched from defeat, propaganda in the grandest form, making military stalemate into divine triumph. The temples faced east. Each dawn, sunlight penetrated the inner sanctuary, illuminated statues of the gods, and of Rameses among them. The pharaoh literally enlightened by Ra, engineering serving ideology, architecture proving divine favor. At home, Rameses built everywhere. Pi-Rameses, his new capital in the delta, Karnak temple enlarged, Abu Simbel in the south, temples scattered across Egypt. Building a statement, stone saying what words couldn't. Egypt is strong, Egypt endures, Egypt rules. He fathered over 100 children, married his own daughters, outlived a dozen heirs, ruled so long that most Egyptians knew no other pharaoh. When he died in 1213 BCE, people worried the world might end. How could Egypt exist without Rameses? His son Rameses III tried to match his father's glory. He ruled from 1184 to 1153 BCE. His great test came from the sea peoples, mysterious raiders who destroyed city after city, who toppled the Hittite Empire, who threatened every power in the eastern Mediterranean. They came in great waves, ships and armies together, not just warriors, whole populations seeking new homes, fleeing some disaster we can't identify, climate change, barbarian invasions, internal collapse. Something drove them from their homelands, made them desperate, dangerous. Rameses III fought them on land and sea. The temple at Medinet Habu shows the battles, ships ramming ships, arrows flying, soldiers drowning. Egypt's last great military victory, the sea peoples defeated, but at enormous cost. The war exhausted Egypt. Strained resources, weakened authority. Provincial governors grew independent again. The empire began shrinking. Not collapse, just gradual weakening, the slow decline that precedes fall. Later Ramessids were shadows, weak kings with strong names. The 11th Ramesses lost control of the south, the 20th lost control of the north. By 1077 BCE, the empire was gone, the new kingdom over. Egypt entered another intermediate period. The last age of pharaonic glory had ended, but the monuments remained. Abu Simbel still stands, Karnak still impresses, the tomb of Tutankhamun still dazzles. Stone lasts longer than empires. Art outlives politics. The Golden Age was over. Its memory would prove eternal. Stone lasts longer than empires. Art outlives politics. The Golden Age was over. Its memory would prove eternal. But memories don't rule countries. Real kings rule real places with real armies. And by 1077 BCE, Egypt's real power was fading like morning mist. The decline didn't announce itself with trumpets. No dramatic collapse. No foreign invasion. Just slow erosion, like the Nile wearing away its banks, year by year, stone by stone. Until one day you notice the river has changed course. A papyrus tells the story perfectly, the report of Weneman, written around 1070 BCE. It reads like comedy, tragic comedy. An Egyptian official travels to Lebanon to buy cedar wood for Ammon's sacred boat. Simple mission, routine diplomacy, the kind of thing Egypt had done for centuries. But everything goes wrong. Pirates steal his money. The Lebanese prince treats him like a beggar. "Where are your letters of credit?" the prince asks. "Where is your Egyptian gold?" Weneman has neither. The pharaoh is too poor to pay, too weak to command, too distant to protect his envoy. The prince lectures him about Egyptian weakness. "Your fathers ruled here. You're nobody. Your king is nobody. Egypt means nothing now." Harsh words, true words. The empire that once stretched to the Euphrates couldn't even buy wood from neighbours. When Ammon returns home humiliated, empty-handed, the report he writes drips with wounded pride. He remembers when Egyptian ambassadors were welcomed like gods, when Pharaoh's word was law from Nubia to Syria, when Egypt gave orders, not heard lectures about insignificance. The problem was division. Again, the old Egyptian disease. When central authority weakened, the two lands pulled apart. In the north, a new dynasty ruled from Tanis. In the south, the high priests of Amun controlled Thebes. Two capitals, two governments, two Egypts. The northern pharaohs claimed legitimacy through royal bloodlines. Thin claims, but official. They controlled the delta, the trade routes, the Mediterranean connections. They had wealth. They had foreign contacts. They lacked the south. The southern priest-kings claimed divine authority. Amun's chosen servants. They controlled Upper Egypt, the traditional heartland, the sacred sites. They had religious legitimacy. They had popular support. They lacked unified power. Neither was strong enough to rule alone. Neither was weak enough to submit. The result was stalemate. Diplomatic Egypt split down the middle. Each side too proud to yield, too weak to win. Into this weakness came the Libyans. Not invaders exactly, more like gradual infiltration. Libyan tribes had pressed Egypt's western borders for centuries, sometimes as enemies, sometimes as mercenaries. Now they settled permanently. Shoshonkhi founded the 22nd dynasty around 945 BCE, a Libyan chief who became pharaoh. His descendants would rule for 2 centuries. They kept Egyptian titles, performed Egyptian rituals, built in Egyptian style, but they were different, foreign, new blood in ancient veins. The Libyan pharaohs tried to restore unity. Some success at first. Shoshonkhi even raided Palestine, captured Jerusalem, brought home tribute from King Solomon's son, a shadow of former glory but still impressive. Egypt was down, but not dead. But Libyan rule brought changes. Tribal politics entered Egyptian government. Chiefs became governors. Kinship mattered more than bureaucratic rank. The careful administrative system of the new kingdom crumbled, replaced by personal loyalty networks, efficient but unstable. Multiple dynasties emerged simultaneously, the 22nd in Tanis, the 23rd in Leontopolis, local princes claiming royal titles. The unity Shoshonkh had restored fragmented again, worse than before. Not 2 Egypts now, but dozens, each nome a potential kingdom. Foreign policy became reactive. No more great campaigns, no more empire building, just responding to crises, defending borders, protecting trade routes, playing regional politics, Egypt as participant, not leader, follower, not guide. The old prestige evaporated. Former vassals ignored Egyptian letters. Former allies made separate arrangements. Former enemies grew bold. The network of fear and respect that held the empire together dissolved. Egypt stood alone, increasingly isolated, increasingly irrelevant. Culture reflected political reality. No more grand building projects, no more artistic innovation, no more literary flowering. Instead, copies, repetitions, echoes of greater days. The creative energy was gone, replaced by nostalgia, by dreams of vanished glory. Trade declined but didn't disappear. Egypt still had gold, still had grain, still sat astride important routes. But competitors emerged: Phoenician merchants, Greek traders, Assyrian caravans. Egypt's monopolies broke down, its advantages eroded. The army weakened dangerously, no more professional soldiers, no more standardized equipment, no more coordinated campaigns. Local militias with local loyalties, Libyan tribesmen with tribal customs, mercenaries who fought for pay, not patriotism. Unity of command disappeared with unity of state. By 800 BCE, Egypt was a geographical expression, a collection of loosely connected territories sharing culture and river but little else. The two lands existed in name only. The pharaoh ruled his capital and little beyond. Provincial governors ignored royal commands. Local priests controlled local resources. The centre could not hold because there was no centre anymore. From the south came salvation, or what seemed like salvation. The kingdom of Kush, deep in Nubia, had grown strong while Egypt grew weak. Kush had learned from its former masters, adopted Egyptian culture, worshipped Egyptian gods, built pyramids in the desert south of the Fourth Cataract. But Kush had also remained African, fierce, unified, strong leadership, clear succession, professional armies, everything Egypt had lost. The student had surpassed the teacher. The colony was stronger than the metropolis. King Pi of Kush looked north around 750 BCE and saw opportunity. Egypt divided, fighting itself, too weak to resist, too proud to submit. The gods, he believed, wanted him to restore Ma'at, to reunite the two lands under righteous rule. His righteous rule, naturally. The campaign took years, not one great battle but steady pressure. Town by town, nome by nome. Some Egyptian rulers submitted immediately, recognized superior strength. Others fought desperately, clung to local power, were crushed accordingly. The siege of Memphis was crucial. The ancient capital, the balance point between Upper and Lower Egypt. Piè's army surrounded the city, cut off supplies, waited. Memphis was strong, but hunger is stronger. The city surrendered. The north lay open. Piè's victory Stela tells the story proudly. How he purified the temples, how he performed the proper rituals, how the gods blessed his conquest. This wasn't foreign invasion, this was religious restoration. Egypt saved from chaos by African righteousness. The Kushite pharaohs of Dynasty 25 were more Egyptian than the Egyptians. They rebuilt temples neglected for centuries. They revived ancient rituals forgotten in the north. They studied old texts, copied ancient art styles, created an archaic revival, Egypt's golden age recreated by foreign kings. In their homeland, they built pyramid fields, at Nuri, at Kuru, at Meroe. Not the giant pyramids of Giza, smaller, steeper, but undeniably royal. The African pharaohs buried in pyramid tombs while native Egyptians used simple mastabas, the symbols of pharaonic power preserved in Nubia. They ruled Egypt as Egyptians, took Egyptian throne names, wore Egyptian regalia, built in Egyptian style, but they remained Kushite, appointed Kushite officials, married Kushite nobles, kept strong ties to their homeland, Egypt as province of a greater African kingdom. For a century it worked. Egypt was united again, prosperous again, respected again. The Kushite pharaohs restored order, revived trade, rebuilt monuments, brought peace to the two lands. Foreign rule but effective rule. Conquest disguised as restoration. But storms were gathering in the north. Assyria was rising. The greatest military power the world had yet seen. Professional armies, iron weapons, siege engines, administrative genius. They had conquered Babylon, subjugated Israel. Now they looked toward Egypt. The clash was inevitable, Assyria expanding south, Egypt expanding north, Syria-Palestine as battleground. The Kushite pharaoh Taharqa allied with local princes, promised Egyptian support against Assyrian expansion, ancient Egyptian policy, control through local allies. Esarhaddon of Assyria struck first, 671 BCE. His armies poured south through Palestine, scattered Egyptian allies, besieged Memphis, took it after fierce fighting. Taharqa fled south, the delta submitted. For the first time in over 1,000 years, northern Egypt had foreign occupiers, but the Kushites didn't surrender. They regrouped in Upper Egypt, gathered loyal forces, struck back when Assyrian attention turned elsewhere, recaptured Memphis, expelled the garrisons, restored Kushite rule. The war continued. Ashurbanipal, Esarhaddon's son, ended the contest. 663 BCE. He led the greatest Assyrian army ever assembled south, through Palestine, through the Delta, up the Nile to Thebes itself, the sacred city, the Holy of Holies, Egypt's spiritual heart. The sack of Thebes shocked the ancient world. The city that had ruled Egypt for centuries, that had built Karnak Temple, that had housed the tombs of pharaohs, burned, looted, destroyed. Its treasures carried off to Nineveh, its people enslaved, its temples desecrated. The Hebrew prophet Nahum captured the horror. Art thou better than Noamun that was situate among the rivers? Noamun was Thebes. The city that seemed eternal had fallen. If Thebes could die, any city could die. Any kingdom could fall. Taharqa fled deeper into Nubia. His successor Tantamani tried one last counterattack, failed completely. The Kushite pharaohs retreated to their homeland, left Egypt to its fate. The 25th dynasty was over, African rule ended. Egypt lay prostrate before Assyrian power, but Assyria was overextended. Egypt was far from the Assyrian heartland, hard to rule, expensive to garrison. The Assyrians needed local cooperation. They found it in Psamtik of Sais, a Delta prince with royal bloodlines, ambitious, capable, opportunistic. Psamtik played a careful game, loyal to Assyria when they were strong, independent when they were distracted. He rebuilt Egyptian power slowly, carefully, without alarming his overlords. Greek mercenaries gave him military strength. Phoenician allies provided naval power. Time gave him opportunity. By 656 BCE, he controlled most of Egypt. The Assyrians were busy elsewhere, fighting Babylonians, suppressing rebellions. They couldn't spare armies for distant Egypt. Psamtik declared independence, founded Dynasty 26, became pharaoh in fact as well as name. The foreign dynasties were over. Libyans and Kushites had ruled Egypt for 4 centuries, neither as conquerors, both as adopted Egyptians. They had preserved Egyptian culture while Egyptian natives squabbled, had maintained Egyptian traditions while Egyptian rulers failed. Strange irony. Egypt saved by foreigners who became more Egyptian than Egypt itself. Through all the political chaos, something remarkable happened. Egyptian culture didn't die, didn't even weaken significantly. While kings fought, and dynasties rose and fell, and foreigners ruled, the deeper Egypt continued, in temples, in villages, in the daily life of ordinary people. Culture proved stronger than politics. Identity outlasted empire. The temples became islands of stability. When royal power collapsed, priestly power grew. Local temples controlled local resources, managed local affairs, provided local leadership. The high priest of Ptah at Memphis, the high priest of Amun at Thebes, the high priest of Neith at Sais. They became more important than distant pharaohs. These temple states weren't revolutionary. They preserved the old ways, maintained the ancient rituals, copied the traditional texts, trained new generations of priests and scribes. Temple schools kept learning alive. Temple workshops kept crafts flourishing. Temple granaries kept communities fed. The priests became the guardians of Egyptian identity. They decided what was authentically Egyptian, what traditions mattered, what changes were acceptable. They resisted foreign influence, maintained cultural purity, created islands of Egyptianness in a sea of foreign rule. Writing evolved to serve this cultural preservation. The old hieroglyphic script remained for religious texts, sacred writing for sacred purposes. But daily business needed something faster, something simpler. Demotic script emerged, cursive, practical, efficient. Demotic wasn't just abbreviated hieroglyphics. It was a new writing system, with its own rules, its own style, its own purposes, legal documents, business contracts, personal letters, literature, the Egyptian language adapting to new needs while keeping its ancient soul. The Demotic Chronicle appeared during this period, political commentary disguised as prophecy. It criticized foreign rule, praised traditional values, looked forward to native restoration. Egyptian intellectuals using Egyptian writing to maintain Egyptian hope. Culture as resistance. Religious innovation flourished despite conservative priestly control. Animal cults grew enormously popular. Not new exactly. Egyptians had always honoured sacred animals, but now it became mass movement. The Apis bull at Memphis, the Busis bull at Armant, sacred cats at Bubastis, sacred crocodiles at Crocodilopolis. Millions of mummified animals, cats, birds, crocodiles, even beetles, each carefully wrapped, properly preserved, buried in vast cemeteries, the common people expressing devotion through animal worship, popular religion adapting ancient beliefs to current needs. These cults gave ordinary Egyptians something their own. While foreign kings ruled from distant capitals, local animals provided accessible divinity. You could visit the sacred bull, bring offerings, receive blessings, feel connected to the gods without royal intermediation. The animal cemeteries became huge industries, professional embalmers, specialized priests, elaborate ceremonies, economic opportunities in religious devotion. Thousands of people earning livings from popular piety. The cults supported themselves, supported their communities, supported Egyptian identity. Oracle consultation became widespread, not royal monopoly anymore. Anyone could ask the gods questions, through sacred animals, through temple statues, through divine dreams. Democracy of divination, the gods speaking directly to individuals, not just to pharaohs. Magic flourished in popular culture. Protective amulets, healing spells, love charms, curse tablets. The formal religion of the temples was one thing. The practical magic of daily life was another, both authentically Egyptian, both preserving ancient traditions. Provincial art styles developed distinctive characteristics, no longer copying royal models, creating local variations. Memphis style differed from Theban style. Delta art looked different from Upper Egyptian art. Unity and diversity. Egyptian identity expressed through regional variation. The Greek colonies in the Delta created interesting cultural interactions, Greeks learning Egyptian traditions, Egyptians adopting Greek techniques, Greco-Egyptian artistic fusion. But Egyptian elements remained dominant. Greek influence was absorbed, made Egyptian, not the reverse. Literature continued, not the great classics of the Middle Kingdom, but stories, instructions, religious texts. The teaching of Ankh-Sheshonk mixed traditional wisdom with contemporary concerns. Egyptian values adapted to changing circumstances. Historical consciousness grew stronger. Lists of kings, chronicles of events, records of temple building, Egyptians documenting their past, preserving their memory, insisting on their continuity. History as identity maintenance. The concept of pharaonic legitimacy persisted. Foreign rulers felt compelled to adopt Egyptian forms, to claim Egyptian divine sanction, to perform Egyptian rituals. The idea of pharaoh survived actual pharaohs, cultural pattern outlasting political reality. Local governors maintained Egyptian administrative practices, Egyptian law, Egyptian customs, Egyptian calendar. The infrastructure of Egyptianness continued functioning. Even when pharaonic authority was weak or foreign, habit stronger than politics, marriage customs, burial practices, festival celebrations, daily routines. The texture of Egyptian life remained recognizably Egyptian. Through conquest, through division, through foreign rule, culture embedded in daily practice, identity lived rather than imposed. Women maintained traditional roles but gained some autonomy. With weak central authority, local customs mattered more. Some women became temple musicians, others managed family businesses, a few even ruled as local leaders. Egyptian adaptability within Egyptian tradition. By 664 BCE, when the Sate dynasty restored native rule, they inherited a country that was still recognizably Egypt. Changed, yes. Evolved, certainly. But Egyptian. The cultural core had survived political chaos. The identity had outlasted the empire. Egypt endured because Egyptians remained Egyptian, even when their pharaohs were foreign, even when their gods seemed distant, even when their glory was memory. The culture persisted, the identity survived, Egypt lived. The culture persisted, the identity survived, Egypt lived. And from that living culture came revival. Like the Nile after a low flood, Egypt rose again, not to the heights of the New Kingdom, but higher than anyone expected, higher than seemed possible after centuries of weakness. Psamtik I ruled from Sais in the western delta, a small city, an unlikely capital. But location mattered less than leadership, and Psamtik was a leader. He had learned from Egypt's defeats, from its humiliations, from its long decline. He would not repeat past mistakes. The Sate revival, historians call it. Dynasty 26, from 664 to 525 BCE. Egypt's last great flowering under native rule. 140 years of prosperity, of cultural achievement, of international respect, the final golden sunset of pharaonic civilization. Psamtik's secret was simple. Look backward to move forward. Egypt had been great before, it could be great again. But not by copying foreign models, by rediscovering Egyptian ones, by becoming more Egyptian than Egypt had been in centuries. This wasn't nostalgia, it was strategy. Conscious archaism, scholars call it. Deliberate revival of ancient styles, ancient practices, ancient glories. The Old Kingdom and Middle Kingdom became templates, models to copy, standards to achieve. Walk through a museum's late-period collection. The sculptures look familiar. Clean lines, formal poses, idealized faces, just like Old Kingdom masterpieces. But look closer. The techniques are better, the finish smoother, the details sharper. This is ancient style perfected by modern skill. The same with texts. Scribes copied Middle Kingdom literature word for word, but they also created new works in old styles. The instruction of Ankh-Shonk reads like ancient wisdom literature, but it addresses contemporary problems. Traditional forms serving modern purposes. Temple building resumed on a grand scale. Not the megalomaniacal projects of the New Kingdom. Something more refined, more tasteful. The Temple of Neith at Sais. Additions to ancient shrines throughout Egypt. Old gods receiving new homes built in old styles. But Psamtik understood something crucial. Egypt couldn't isolate itself anymore. The world had changed. Greeks controlled Mediterranean trade. Phoenicians dominated sea routes. Assyrians and Babylonians fought for Middle Eastern supremacy. Egypt had to engage with this wider world, had to find its place in it. The solution was brilliant. Make Egypt indispensable. The Greeks needed grain. Egypt had grain. The Greeks needed silver. Egypt had silver mines. The Greeks needed secure trade routes. Egypt controlled the Red Sea connection. Mutual benefit, mutual dependence, peace through prosperity. Greek merchants established permanent colonies in Egypt. Naucratis in the delta became their commercial centre, a Greek city on Egyptian soil, with Greek temples, Greek customs, Greek law, but under Egyptian sovereignty, Egypt controlling foreign influence by containing it geographically. The Greeks brought more than trade. They brought military expertise, professional soldiers, advanced tactics, naval technology. Psamtik hired thousands of Greek mercenaries, not to replace Egyptian soldiers, to train them, to lead them, to modernize them. The new Egyptian navy dominated the eastern Mediterranean. Egyptian ships protected trade routes, fought pirates, projected power. For the first time since the New Kingdom, Egypt was a naval force, Greek expertise serving Egyptian interests. The greatest project was the canal, connecting the Nile to the Red Sea. Earlier pharaohs had dreamed of it, attempted it, failed. The Sate kings completed it, engineering triumph serving commercial vision. Ships could sail from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean, through Egypt, under Egyptian control. Imagine the possibilities. Indian spices, Arabian frankincense, African gold, all flowing through Egypt. Egyptian taxes, Egyptian profits, Egyptian power. The canal made Egypt indispensable to Mediterranean commerce. Wealth flowed like water. The prosperity showed everywhere, in the temples, in the tombs, in the art, in the literature. Egypt was confident again, successful again, important again. Not the superpower of Thutmose III's day, but a major player, a regional power, a force to be reckoned with. Herodotus, the Greek historian, visited Egypt during this period. His descriptions glow with wonder. The temples impressed him. The customs fascinated him. The antiquity amazed him. Egypt as tourist destination, as source of wisdom, as marvel of the ancient world. The Sate pharaohs were clever diplomats. They played the great powers against each other, allied with Babylon against Assyria, supported Greek cities against Persia, maintained independence through balance, through careful neutrality, through strategic flexibility. Trade networks spread Egyptian influence. Egyptian merchants in Cyprus, Egyptian colonies in Libya, Egyptian interest in Nubia. Not empire as the new kingdom understood it, but commercial influence, economic power, soft control through mutual benefit. The cultural revival affected every aspect of Egyptian life. Language became more classical, art more traditional, religion more conservative, deliberately, consciously. Egypt defining itself against foreign influence by emphasizing its uniqueness. But foreign influences crept in anyway. Greek artistic techniques, Phoenician commercial practices, Persian administrative methods. The Sate pharaohs adopted what worked, rejected what didn't. Synthesis disguised as conservation. Women gained prominence in this period. Nitocris became God's wife of Amun at Thebes, a position of enormous power, religious and political. She controlled vast resources, commanded thousands of priests, ruled southern Egypt in all but name. The Sate period produced great literature, the Demotic Chronicle, stories of wonder and magic, legal texts of remarkable sophistication, historical chronicles, Egypt documenting itself, preserving its memory, celebrating its achievement. By 5025 BCE, Sate Egypt was prosperous, unified, confident. The canal brought wealth, the navy protected trade, the army maintained order, the temples preserved tradition. The last native pharaohs had given Egypt one final golden age, but storms were gathering in the east. Persia was rising. Cyrus the Great had conquered Babylon, liberated the Jews, created the largest empire the world had ever seen. Now his son Cambyses looked toward Egypt, the last independent kingdom, the final prize. The Sate Renaissance was ending. The Persian period was about to begin. Cambyses came to Egypt in 525 BCE like a summer storm, swift, decisive, overwhelming. The Battle of Pelusium decided everything. Persian discipline against Egyptian courage, Persian numbers against Egyptian valor. The outcome was never in doubt. Egypt's last independent army broke and fled. The Sate dynasty ended in defeat. But Cambyses was no barbarian conqueror. He understood Egypt, respected its antiquity, recognized its importance. This wasn't destruction. This was absorption. Egypt would become a Persian province, but a special province, a privileged province, a jewel in the Persian crown. The Persian approach to empire was sophisticated. Local rulers could remain, local customs could continue, local gods could be honored, as long as taxes were paid, as long as orders were obeyed, as long as loyalty was assured, rule through cooperation, not coercion. Cambyses took Egyptian titles, performed Egyptian rituals, built Egyptian temples. He became pharaoh according to Egyptian law, Persian king according to Persian law, both simultaneously, neither exclusively. Imperial rule adapted to local tradition. The Persian satraps who governed Egypt were efficient administrators. They maintained Egyptian institutions, preserved Egyptian culture, protected Egyptian interests. Why change what worked? Why destroy what produced wealth? Smart conquerors preserve value. They don't waste it. Trade flourished under Persian rule. The great Persian roads connected Egypt to India, to Central Asia, to the Black Sea. Egyptian goods reached markets unimaginable under the Sates. Persian protection made commerce safe. Persian currency made trade simple. Empire meant opportunity. But not all Egyptians accepted foreign rule gracefully. National pride ran deep. Religious tradition demanded native pharaohs. Some priests preached resistance. Some nobles plotted rebellion. Some common people longed for independence. The first great rebellion came in 486 BCE under Xerxes. The Egyptians proclaimed a native pharaoh, raised armies, declared independence. For 2 years they held out. But Persian resources were vast, Persian determination unwavering. The rebellion was crushed, the leaders executed, independence postponed. More revolts followed, under Artaxerxes I, under Darius II. Each time, the same pattern: initial success, growing confidence, Persian retaliation, bloody defeat. Egypt was strong enough to rebel, not strong enough to stay free. The cycle repeated endlessly. The most successful rebellion came in 404 BCE. Amyrtaeus of Sais declared himself pharaoh, expelled the Persian garrison, restored native rule. For 60 years, Egypt was independent again, not one pharaoh but several, dynasties 28, 29 and 30, the last native rulers of ancient Egypt. These final pharaohs tried desperately to restore Egypt's glory. They built temples, fought wars, made alliances. Nectar Nebo, I fortified the delta, created defensive positions, prepared for Persian return. Because return they would. Everyone knew it. The only question was when. Persian culture influenced Egypt despite political resistance. Persian artistic motifs appeared in Egyptian decoration. Persian administrative practices entered Egyptian government. Persian religious ideas affected Egyptian theology. Conquest by osmosis. Influence through contact. But Egyptian culture influenced Persia too. Persian nobles studied in Egyptian temples. Persian artists learned Egyptian techniques. Persian kings adopted Egyptian royal symbolism. Cultural exchange flowed both ways. Neither culture remained pure. Both changed through contact. The Egyptian priesthood remained powerful throughout the Persian period. They controlled vast temple estates, managed local affairs, preserved traditional learning. The Persians needed their cooperation, bought their loyalty, protected their privileges, religion as political tool. In the temples, ancient rituals continued unchanged. The daily service to the gods, the great festivals, the sacred mysteries. Persian rule was political fact, but religious life remained Egyptian. The gods seemed undisturbed by foreign pharaohs. Egyptian law continued alongside Persian law. Egyptian courts judged Egyptian cases. Egyptian scribes wrote Egyptian documents. Egyptian customs governed Egyptian families. Dual legal system, dual cultural identity. Egyptianness preserved within Persian rule. The Demotic script flourished during this period. More Egyptian texts survive from Persian times than from many native dynasties. Legal documents, business contracts, literary works, religious texts, Egyptians writing in Egyptian about Egyptian concerns, cultural continuity despite political disruption. Some Egyptians prospered under Persian rule, merchants who traded across the empire, officials who served both masters, priests who adapted to new realities, pragmatists who bent without breaking, survivors who outlasted conquerors. Others never accepted foreign rule, preserved pure Egyptian identity, waited for restoration, supported every rebellion, treasured every tradition. The resistance was cultural as much as political. Being Egyptian meant rejecting Persian authority. When Alexander appeared in 332 BCE, many Egyptians welcomed him, not because they loved Greeks, but because they hated Persians. Any enemy of Persia was Egypt's friend. Liberation through conquest. Freedom through new servitude. The irony was bitter but acceptable. The Persian period lasted over 200 years with interruptions, longer than many native dynasties, but it was always seen as foreign rule, temporary, illegitimate, unfortunate. Egyptians measured time by when native rule would return, not if, when. Persian administrative efficiency impressed even enemies. Persian religious tolerance pleased even opponents. Persian commercial opportunities enriched even critics. But none of this made Persian rule acceptable. Politics is about more than efficiency. Identity matters more than prosperity. Some things cannot be bought. Some loyalties cannot be changed. The last native pharaohs burned bright and brief like desert stars. Dynasty 30 ruled for just 38 years, from 380 to 343 BCE. But what years they were! One final burst of Egyptian creativity, one last assertion of pharaonic power, one closing chapter of ancient glory. Nectar Nebo, I was a general who seized power, not unusual in Egyptian history. But he proved to be more than just another military strongman. He was a builder, a defender, a true pharaoh in the ancient tradition. Under him, Egypt flowered one last time. The delta became a fortress, canal systems that could be flooded to stop invaders, fortified cities controlling key routes, professional armies with the latest weapons, Greek mercenaries providing expertise, Egyptian soldiers providing courage, the homeland protected by land and water. Nectanebo I built temples throughout Egypt. At Philae, the beautiful island shrine to Isis. At Edfu, the magnificent temple to Horus. At Dendera, additions to Hathor's sacred complex. Traditional Egyptian architecture serving traditional Egyptian gods, the old ways preserved in stone. His son Teos tried to regain Egypt's empire. He led armies into Palestine, attempted to reconquer Syria, but the effort was too much, too expensive, too ambitious. Egypt in 360 BCE wasn't Egypt in 1400 BCE. The world had changed. Egypt's relative power had declined. Nectanebo II, the last native pharaoh, was more realistic. He focused on defense, on preservation, on making Egypt impregnable. The delta became a maze of waterways and fortifications. Any invader would face flooding, ambush, guerrilla warfare, Egypt as fortress kingdom. He built beautifully. The temple complex at Bebeit el-Hagar used the hardest granite, carved with incredible precision, polished to mirror smoothness, Egyptian craftsmanship at its absolute finest, as if the stone carvers knew this was their final masterpiece. In the south, work continued on Philae Temple, the most romantic spot in Egypt, an island crowned with columns, surrounded by Nile rapids, sacred to Isis, the goddess of love and magic. Pilgrims came from across the Mediterranean, Egypt as spiritual destination, as source of ancient wisdom. The art of this period is remarkable. Portrait sculptures with individual faces, not idealized pharaohs, but real men, lined, weathered, determined. The burden of defending Egypt etched in stone. Realism serving royal propaganda. But Artaxerxes III of Persia was patient, methodical. He spent years preparing, gathering allies, planning carefully. When he struck in 343 BCE, the assault was overwhelming. Persian troops, Greek mercenaries, Phoenician ships, the combined forces of half the world against one brave kingdom. Nectanebo II fought brilliantly, used every defensive advantage, flooded the delta, ambushed Persian columns, made every mile cost blood. But numbers eventually told. Persian resources were infinite, Egyptian were not. The last pharaoh fled south, then into exile. Egypt was Persian again. The temples were not destroyed, the culture was not suppressed, the people were not enslaved. Persian rule was efficient, tolerant, even benevolent. But it was still foreign rule, still the end of 3,000 years of native pharaohs, still the death of something precious. In 332 BCE, Alexander arrived, young, victorious, charismatic. The Persians collapsed without serious resistance. Egypt had a new conqueror, a new master, a new chapter beginning. The Pharaonic age was ending, the Hellenistic age was beginning. Ancient Egypt prepared for its final transformation. Ancient Egypt prepared for its final transformation. In 332 BCE, Alexander arrived, young, victorious, charismatic. But to the Egyptians, he was something more important than a conqueror. He was a liberator, the enemy of their Persian enemies, the destroyer of their oppressors. Alexander understood theatre. He didn't storm into Egypt like a barbarian invader. He came as a pilgrim, as a seeker of wisdom, as someone who respected Egypt's ancient glory. The Persian garrison at Pelusium surrendered without a fight. The satrap handed over his province peacefully. Egypt changed hands like a gift passed between friends. The new conqueror went straight to Memphis, the ancient capital, the religious heart of Egypt. There, in the great temple of Ptah, he performed the traditional coronation rituals. The priests crowned him pharaoh according to customs 3,000 years old. Alexander the Great became Alexander the Egyptian, Macedonian king and Egyptian god-king simultaneously. Then came the pilgrimage to Siwa Oasis, deep in the western desert, home to the oracle of Amun, the god the Greeks called Zeus Ammon. Alexander travelled across burning sand to ask the god a question. What question? Only Alexander knew, but he emerged claiming divine parentage, son of Zeus, son of Amun, divine authority confirmed by desert oracle. Back on the Mediterranean coast, Alexander chose the site for his city, Alexandria, between Lake Mareotis and the sea, where the Nile came closest to the Mediterranean. Perfect location for trade, for culture, for power. The city that would become the greatest in the ancient world. But Alexander didn't stay to build his city. He had more worlds to conquer. India called. Babylon beckoned. He left Egypt after just 6 months. But those 6 months changed everything. Egypt was no longer African, no longer Middle Eastern. It was Mediterranean, Hellenistic, Greek. When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, his empire shattered like dropped pottery. His generals fought over the pieces. Egypt fell to Ptolemy, a Macedonian noble, a childhood friend of Alexander, a man who understood Egypt's value, its wealth, its strategic importance. Ptolemy was brilliant. He made himself pharaoh but didn't abandon Greek identity. He ruled as both. Egyptian pharaoh for Egyptian subjects, Macedonian king for Greek settlers. Dual identity, dual loyalty, dual legitimacy. The Ptolemaic system was genius. 2 parallel administrations, Greek officials governing Greek settlers, Egyptian officials governing Egyptian natives, Greek law for Greeks, Egyptian law for Egyptians, Greek temples alongside Egyptian temples, separate but connected, different but unified. Alexandria became the marvel of the ancient world, the lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders, standing 400 feet tall, visible for miles at sea, ships from across the Mediterranean guided by Egyptian light. The harbour bustled with vessels, grain ships heading to Greece, luxury goods arriving from India, Egypt as the crossroads of trade. But Alexandria was more than commercial centre. It was intellectual capital. The museum, the library, the greatest collection of knowledge ever assembled. Scholars from across the Greek world came to study, to research, to discover. Alexandria as the brain of the ancient world. The library tried to collect every book ever written. Agents scoured Mediterranean ports, copying manuscripts, buying scrolls, sometimes stealing rare texts. They claimed 700,000 volumes, maybe exaggeration, but certainly the largest library in human history. In the museum, scholars worked like modern university researchers, mathematicians, astronomers, geographers, doctors, engineers, all funded by Ptolemaic wealth, all pursuing knowledge for its own sake, pure research supported by practical politics. Euclid developed geometry in Alexandria. Archimedes studied there. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference from Alexandria. Using Egyptian knowledge and Greek methods, cultural fusion creating scientific revolution. The early Ptolemies built like pharaohs, Egyptian temples, Greek theatres, mixed architecture, the temple at Edfu, the most complete Egyptian temple surviving, built by Greeks, for Egyptian gods, using Egyptian workers, following Egyptian traditions, conquerors preserving what they conquered. But the Ptolemies remained Greek. They married each other, brother marrying sister, like Egyptian pharaohs but for Greek reasons, keeping royal blood pure, preventing palace coups, maintaining Macedonian identity. Egypt ruled by foreigners who became more Egyptian with each generation, but never completely Egyptian. The dynasty lasted 3 centuries, longer than most native Egyptian dynasties. The Ptolemies became Egypt. Egypt became Ptolemaic. Fusion so complete that Greek rule seemed natural. Foreign pharaohs more successful than many native ones. The ultimate conquest. Cultural absorption. Egypt Hellenized. Greece Egyptianized. The Ptolemaic system worked because it embraced contradiction. Greek and Egyptian. Pharaoh and king. Native and foreign. Instead of choosing sides, it chose both. Instead of forcing unity, it celebrated duality. The 2 lands had always been 2. Now they were 4. Greek Upper Egypt, Egyptian Upper Egypt, Greek Lower Egypt, Egyptian Lower Egypt. In Alexandria, Greek settlers lived like Greeks, spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods, followed Greek customs. Their children learned Homer, studied Plato, competed in athletic games. The Mediterranean world in miniature, cosmopolitan, sophisticated, international. But step outside Alexandria, and Egypt remained Egyptian. Villages along the Nile looked the same as always. Farmers planting after the flood, craftsmen working traditional materials, priests performing ancient rituals. The rhythm of Egyptian life continued unchanged. Conquest was political, culture was deeper. The temple building program shows this fusion perfectly. At Dendera, Edfu, Komombo, Philae, the Ptolemies built magnificent temples, pure Egyptian style, traditional layouts, ancient proportions, but the hieroglyphic inscriptions mention Greek kings with Greek names, performing Egyptian ceremonies, cultural synthesis in stone. These temples took centuries to complete, generations of Ptolemies contributing, each adding sections, completing decorations. The temple at Edfu was started in 237 BCE, finished in 57 BCE, 180 years of continuous construction, Egyptian patience serving Greek ambition. The priests cooperated enthusiastically. Why not? The Ptolemies paid well, protected temple properties, respected religious traditions, better than Persian rule, better than chaos, better than independence that couldn't defend itself, pragmatic collaboration, mutual benefit, survival through adaptation. But the priests demanded authenticity. The pharaoh might be Greek, but pharaonic rituals must be Egyptian. No shortcuts, no modernization, no foreign contamination, the daily temple service, the great festivals, the sacred mysteries, all exactly as tradition demanded, cultural purity within political compromise. The Rosetta Stone, created in 196 BCE, shows this cultural complexity perfectly. 3 scripts on one stone, hieroglyphic for the gods, demotic for Egyptian people, Greek for Greek rulers. Same text, 3 audiences, 1 message praising Ptolemy Thaf, but saying it 3 ways, language as politics, script as identity. Most Egyptians remained monolingual, spoke only Egyptian, wrote only demotic, lived entirely Egyptian lives, but the elite became bilingual, maybe trilingual, Egyptian for home, Greek for business, Latin for diplomacy, code switching as survival skill, identity as performance. In the countryside, Greek settlers gradually Egyptianized. They married Egyptian women, adopted Egyptian customs, worshipped Egyptian gods. Their children were more Egyptian than Greek. Their grandchildren were Egyptian who happened to have Greek names. Cultural conquest working both ways. The scientific achievements of Ptolemaic Alexandria amazed the ancient world. Eratosthenes calculated the Earth's circumference using Egyptian geography. Aristarchus proposed that the Earth orbited the Sun. Hipparchus discovered the precession of equinoxes, ancient astronomy reaching modern insights. Medical knowledge advanced dramatically. The Alexandria Medical School became the most famous in the Mediterranean. Doctors trained there practiced from Spain to India. Egyptian mummification knowledge combined with Greek anatomical study. Practical skills serving theoretical understanding. Engineering projects showed the same fusion. The lighthouse used Egyptian construction techniques with Greek architectural principles. The harbour works combined Phoenician maritime knowledge with Egyptian logistics. Innovation through combination, progress through synthesis. Trade made everyone richer. Egyptian grain fed Mediterranean cities. Greek manufactured goods reached African markets. Indian spices passed through Egyptian warehouses. Chinese silk travelled Egyptian roads. Alexandria as economic hub. Egypt as essential link. The monetary system reflected cultural duality. Greek coins for international trade, Egyptian grain measures for local commerce, both systems operating simultaneously, neither replacing the other. Economic flexibility matching cultural complexity. Legal disputes could be complicated. Greek law for contracts between Greeks, Egyptian law for purely Egyptian matters, mixed law for mixed situations, multiple court systems, multiple legal traditions, justice as cultural negotiation. Art developed hybrid styles, Egyptian subject matter with Greek techniques, Greek mythology with Egyptian symbolism, portrait sculptures combining Greek realism with Egyptian idealization, cultural fusion creating new beauty. Religion became especially complex. Greek gods identified with Egyptian ones. Serapis, invented by Ptolemy the Rheaster, combined Osiris with Zeus. Mystery cults mixing Greek philosophy with Egyptian ritual. Isis worship spreading across the Mediterranean. Egyptian gods in Greek clothing conquering Greek cities. By the 1st century BCE, the system was centuries old. Stable, successful, natural. Greeks and Egyptians had learned to live together, work together, worship together. The conquest was complete. Not through force, through time, through compromise, through mutual adaptation. Egypt was Greek, Greece was Egyptian, the Ptolemaic achievement, but time was running out, Rome was rising. The Mediterranean was becoming a Roman lake. Greek kingdoms were falling one by one. Macedonia conquered, Syria absorbed. Only Egypt remained independent, rich, tempting, vulnerable. The last Ptolemy was a woman, Cleopatra VII. She became pharaoh in 51 BCE at age 18, the seventh Cleopatra, but the first to learn Egyptian, the first to speak to her subjects in their own language, the first to truly become Egyptian as well as Greek. Forget Hollywood's seductress. The real Cleopatra was a politician, brilliant, educated, ruthless when necessary. She spoke 9 languages, read philosophy, understood mathematics, governed a kingdom effectively. Her beauty was intelligence. Her weapon was competence. Egypt in her time was still wealthy, still powerful, still independent. The grain ships still fed Rome. The trade routes still brought profit. The culture still amazed visitors. But Rome was growing stronger. Egypt was growing relatively weaker. The balance was shifting. Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BCE, pursuing his rival Pompey. Cleopatra saw opportunity. She allied with Caesar, used Roman civil war to Egypt's advantage, played Roman factions against each other. Ancient Egyptian diplomacy adapted to new circumstances. The relationship with Caesar was political, not romantic. Cleopatra needed Roman protection. Caesar needed Egyptian wealth. Their son Caesarion was a political statement. Egyptian-Roman alliance made flesh. The future imagined in dynastic terms. When Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Cleopatra shifted sides smoothly. Mark Antony controlled the eastern Mediterranean. He needed Egyptian resources. She needed Roman protection. Another alliance, another arrangement, another attempt to preserve Egyptian independence through Roman partnership. The meeting at Tarsus was theatre. Cleopatra arrived dressed as Isis, on a golden barge, with purple sails, surrounded by luxury, the richest woman in the world displaying her wealth. Antony was impressed. Who wouldn't be? But this wasn't seduction. This was a negotiation, power meeting power. Their alliance made strategic sense. Antony controlled Roman armies. Cleopatra controlled Egyptian wealth. Together they could dominate the eastern Mediterranean, maybe challenge Rome itself, maybe create a new empire. Greek-Egyptian-Roman synthesis, cultural fusion through political alliance. The donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE announced their ambitions. Antony divided the eastern world between Cleopatra's children, Caesarion as pharaoh of Egypt, the twins as rulers of Libya and Syria, the youngest as king of Armenia, royal ceremony creating royal claims, dynasty as foreign policy. But Octavian in Rome was smarter, cleverer, more patient. He painted the conflict as Roman versus foreign, civilized versus barbaric, West versus East, ancient prejudices serving modern politics, Romans rallying against Egyptian queen and her Roman lover. The Battle of Actium in 31 BCE was an anticlimax, the naval battle that decided everything, but not through great fighting, through desertion, through betrayal, through the collapse of will. Antony's fleet sailed away, his army surrendered, his cause died without glory, politics as tragedy, ambition as nemesis. Cleopatra returned to Alexandria, tried negotiation, offered bribes, sought compromise. But Octavian wanted total victory, needed Egyptian wealth, desired Eastern glory. Peace was impossible, survival was unlikely, death was preferable to humiliation. The suicide was dignified, not dramatic, not romantic, just practical. A queen choosing her end rather than accepting defeat. Egyptian pharaoh dying Egyptian death. Poisonous snake as symbol of royal power. Asp as an emblem of sovereignty. Death as final political act. Octavian entered Alexandria on August 30th BCE. The last pharaoh was dead. The last independent kingdom was gone. Egypt became a Roman province. 3,000 years of pharaonic rule ended. Not with battle, not with destruction, just with bureaucratic efficiency, province organized, taxes assessed, administration installed. The age of pharaohs was over. The age of emperors had begun. Egypt would be Roman, then Byzantine, then Islamic. Never again independent, never again Egyptian ruled. The Nile still flowed, the sun still rose, the people still lived. But something essential had died with Cleopatra. something that could never be restored. The ancient world was ending. The modern world was beginning. Egypt would endure. But in Egypt the kingdom was finished forever. Egypt would endure. But Egypt the kingdom was finished forever. Or so it seemed in 30 BCE. But kingdoms die. Ideas live. Techniques survive. Beauty endures. What the pharaohs created outlasted the pharaohs themselves. By centuries. By millennia. Ancient Egypt's gifts to humanity spread far beyond the Nile Valley. Shaped civilizations that never knew pharaohs existed. Look up at any great building, any monument, any structure meant to inspire awe. You're seeing Egyptian influence, the pyramid shape, the massive columns, the sense of permanence built in stone, architecture as statement, building as power. The pharaohs invented monumental construction. Every government building since has borrowed their lessons. The Greeks learned geometry from Egyptian priests. The Romans copied Egyptian engineering. Medieval cathedrals used Egyptian proportions. Modern skyscrapers echo Egyptian ambitions. The Washington Monument is an obelisk. The Lincoln Memorial has Egyptian columns. 3,000 years later, we still build like pharaohs when we want to impress. But Egypt's deeper gift was spiritual, the idea of one God ruling all. Akhenaten's failed revolution succeeded elsewhere. Moses, raised in Egyptian court, carried monotheism to the Hebrews. Jesus, fleeing to Egypt as child, grew up influenced by Egyptian thought. Muhammad, trading in Egyptian markets, absorbed Egyptian ideas. The three great monotheistic religions all touched Egyptian soil, all learned from Egyptian wisdom. The resurrection story comes from Egypt. Osiris dying and rising again, the soul surviving bodily death, the judgment after death weighing hearts against feathers, heaven as reward for good life, hell as punishment for evil. Christian theology built on Egyptian foundations. Islamic paradise borrowed Egyptian imagery. Jewish resurrection hopes echoed Egyptian dreams. Egyptian medicine travelled the ancient world. Their surgical techniques, their anatomical knowledge, their drug recipes. Greek doctors studied in Egyptian temples. Roman physicians used Egyptian treatments. Medieval Islamic medicine preserved Egyptian texts. The Edwin Smith Papyrus still teaches modern surgeons. Egyptian knowledge saved lives for thousands of years. Agriculture owes Egypt enormous debts. Irrigation systems, crop rotation, flood management, record keeping. The Nile Valley was humanity's first great agricultural laboratory. Techniques developed there spread across the world, fed civilizations, supported cities, made complex society possible. The calendar you use began in Egypt. 365 days, 12 months, solar year, lunar months. The pharaohs created time as we measure it, gave humanity the grid on which all later civilizations built their schedules. Paper comes from papyrus, writing from hieroglyphs, books from Egyptian scrolls. The alphabet traces back to Egyptian signs. Every word you read carries Egyptian DNA. Every letter you write descends from Egyptian scribes. Communication itself bears pharaonic fingerprints. Egyptian art established templates still followed today. Portrait sculpture, narrative relief, decorative patterns, colour symbolism, the golden ratio, mathematical proportion, beauty as mathematical relationship, art as eternal statement. Museums worldwide preserve Egyptian masterpieces, but Egyptian principles live in art everywhere. Even government borrowed Egyptian ideas. Divine kingship became royal authority. Administrative bureaucracy spread from Egyptian models. Record-keeping systems, tax collection methods, legal procedures. The pharaohs invented large-scale government. Everyone since has adapted their innovations. For over 1,000 years, Egypt slept. Roman province, Byzantine backwater, Islamic territory. The pyramids stood forgotten. The temples lay buried. The hieroglyphs remained unread. Ancient Egypt became legend. Story, myth, memory preserved in Greek and Roman writers, but not understanding, not direct knowledge. Then came Napoleon, 1798. Not just military expedition, scientific mission, scholars and soldiers together, artists drawing monuments, engineers measuring pyramids, historians copying inscriptions, the Description de l'Egypte, 24 volumes documenting everything, Egypt introduced to modern Europe, wonder reborn. But the real breakthrough came with a stone, the Rosetta Stone, found by French soldiers, captured by British troops, studied by brilliant minds, the same text in 3 scripts. Greek they could read, Hieroglyphic they couldn't, until Jean-François Champollion solved the puzzle. 1822, ancient Egypt could speak again. The decipherment opened floodgates. Tombs were explored, temples were cleared, papyri were translated. The ancient Egyptians spoke in their own voices, not through Greek historians, not through Roman travellers, but directly, personally, humanly, their hopes, their fears, their daily lives, their extraordinary achievements. Howard Carter finding Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. Wonderful things gleaming in electric light, gold and jewels preserved in desert darkness. The boy king sleeping in his golden coffin, 33 centuries undisturbed. The discovery that made Egypt famous worldwide. Ancient glamour meeting modern media. Egypt became romance, adventure, mystery, Hollywood movies, adventure novels, tourist destinations. The exotic East made accessible. Ancient wisdom for modern seekers, pyramids on postcards, Sphinx on souvenirs, Egypt as brand, as fantasy, as escape from ordinary life. But beneath the romance lay real achievement, real people, real civilization. The pharaohs weren't just movie characters. They were humans who built something lasting, something beautiful, something meaningful. The romance was deserved. The achievement was genuine. The legacy was earned. The Nile still flows, north through desert, north to the sea, the same direction, the same destination, the same rhythm that shaped pharaonic Egypt. Summer flood, winter planting, spring harvest. The eternal cycle continues. Modern dams may control the timing, but the river remembers its ancient pattern. Stand beside the Nile at Luxor. The same sun rises over the same cliffs. The same light falls on the same temples. The same river reflects the same sky. Time collapses. Past and present merge. You can almost hear ancient voices, almost see ancient faces, almost touch ancient lives. The monuments endure, battered, weathered, but standing. The pyramids at Giza, the temples at Karnak, the tombs in the Valley of Kings. 4,000 years have passed. They remain, will remain. Stone patience outlasting human ambition. Ancient permanence mocking modern haste. But why does Egypt fascinate us still? Why do millions visit pyramids? Why do children learn pharaohs' names? Why does ancient Egypt live in modern imagination? Because it speaks to something eternal in human nature. The desire to build, to create, to leave something behind, to matter, to be remembered. Egypt achieved immortality. Not the personal immortality the pharaohs sought, but cultural immortality, civilizational immortality. They built for eternity and achieved it. Their names are known, their works survive, their ideas live. Death defeated through achievement, mortality conquered through creation. We study ancient Egypt because we see ourselves, our hopes, our fears, our dreams of permanence, our terror of forgetting. The pharaohs were human like us. They faced the same questions we face: how to live, how to rule, how to create meaning, how to face death, how to be remembered. The Nile flows on. The sun rises daily. The desert endures patiently. And somewhere in the sand, more secrets wait. More stories sleep. More wonders lie buried. Ancient Egypt's greatest gift may be this: the promise that human achievement can last, that beauty endures, that creating something worthy of eternity is possible, the eternal return of hope itself.